Story 1. Discovered my fiancé's affair a week before our dream wedding when I found him making fun of me. Now I'm plotting the perfect revenge. I, 28F, have been eagerly counting down the days until my dream wedding with my fiancé, Mark, 30M. Mark and I first met in college, but we were just friends. Then, it was only when we bumped into each other years later, after our graduation, at a mutual friend's party that we started chatting again and eventually became a couple. We have been together for 4 amazing years. To give a bit of context, Mark and I are polar opposites when it comes to dating. Back in college, Mark was this guy everyone knew to be a player, the charming type who had been through a bunch of relationships, leaving a trail of broken hearts. It was kind of his thing, and he enjoyed the whole bad boy image. He liked staying in touch with his exes even after their breakups. On the other hand, I had a simpler love life. Before Mark, there was just this one guy I had dated back in college. After we called it quits, I decided to cut all ties with my ex. I have never believed in staying friends after a breakup, so it was a clean break for me. When Mark and I started officially dating, it was a surprise to his friends who knew him as the cool, detached dude. Suddenly, he was all about commitment, or at least that's what it seemed like. It was like he flipped a switch and decided to give the whole relationship thing a serious shot. My drama from my past relationship made me appreciate the fresh start with Mark, who, despite his playboy history, seemed genuinely into making things work between us. We did have one minor glitch in our relationship, though. I remember 6 months into my relationship, a woman had tried to reach out to me on Instagram, saying she wanted to tell me something about Mark. I was a bit hesitant but decided to hear her out. She revealed that Mark had initiated inappropriate conversations with her, asking for explicit photos. I was taken aback and immediately confronted him. Despite his attempts to lie his way out, I stood my ground. Eventually, he confessed, blaming it on being intoxicated, and pleaded for my forgiveness. It shook me to the core, and I contemplated ending the relationship right then. However, his persistent apologies and tears made me reconsider, and I reluctantly warned him against repeating such actions. Beyond this incident, our dating life for the last 4 years has been joyful. We have shared laughter, built memories, and faced life's ups and downs together. Mark always surprised me with thoughtful gifts and planned romantic dates. Our connection grew stronger, and despite the rocky start, we found comfort and happiness in each other's company. The incident became a distant memory as we navigated the complexities of life as a couple, and for a while, it seemed like we were on the path to a happily ever after. 2 months ago, Mark proposed to me while we were in Africa. The proposal was a moment straight out of a romantic movie. Underneath the African stars, with the sound of the wilderness around us, he nervously stumbled through his words, confessing his love and how I had changed his perspective on relationships. Mark dropped to one knee, and with a shaky hand, he pulled out the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen. It was simple, heartfelt, and genuine. I couldn't help but say yes, with tears of joy streaming down my face. As the wedding preparations kicked into high gear, my days were a whirlwind of excitement and anticipation. I immersed myself in the joyous chaos of finding the perfect wedding dress, meticulously crafting our guest list, and selecting the best wedding invitation that would make our day unique. Meanwhile, Mark was in charge of planning our dream honeymoon. He seemed genuinely thrilled about it, poring over several travel brochures and sharing his visions for a romantic getaway. Little did I know, while I was happily absorbed in the wedding details, something sinister was unfolding behind the scenes. As the wedding date drew nearer, I started noticing Mark spending more and more time on his phone. I even caught him smiling a few times, but whenever I asked him about it, he would say it was just an Instagram reel. We used to have these sweet date nights, but he started drifting into his phone, making me feel like I was talking to a screen instead of my fiancé. So, one night during a cozy dinner, I finally blurted out, "Is something up, Mark?" I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, like he was hiding something. Mark immediately dismissed my concerns, telling me I was overthinking and stressing for no reason. He made me feel like I was being irrational, questioning my instincts. Mark even went on to say that I always find a way to overanalyze things and create problems where there are none. Hearing his words, I was left wondering if I was indeed just paranoid. But deep down, the unease lingered, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. I decided to ignore my instincts and brushed it off, attributing it to wedding stress and the natural pre-wedding jitters. Yesterday, while Mark was out, I opened his laptop to check out our travel itinerary. He and I had decided to have our honeymoon in a tropical paradise. This was a place that had long been on our bucket list, hence we were quite excited. While I was printing out the itinerary, so I could go through it later, I saw him getting a text message from someone named Boss2. My curiosity got the best of me, leading me to open the message and unveil an inappropriate picture from a woman I recognized all too well. Despite Mark's misleading contact name, she wasn't his boss. She was a coworker of his named Martha. I had met her before at one of their office parties. Staring at that image, I felt a mix of shock and disbelief, but it got even worse when I started scrolling up on the messages. The exchanges between Mark and his coworker, who he deceptively labeled as Boss 2, were filled with messages of how much they loved each other, making fun of me, and discussing intimate details about our relationship. Mark had even told her about my parents, which is a very touchy subject for me. There were multiple explicit pictures that they had sent to each other, and it seemed like they had been having this affair since the past 1 year. It was a gut-wrenching reality to see the concrete proof that Mark was having an affair with this woman. What intensified the pain was the awareness that she, too, was married. I had met her husband, who was a genuinely nice guy and was probably oblivious to the fact that his wife was having an affair with my fiancé. It was challenging to comprehend the heartlessness exhibited by both her and Mark. Having a secret relationship for so long without anyone finding out felt like a callous betrayal of trust. As I read further into the messages, my hands trembled and my heart sank. Martha spilled to Mark how she could not stomach the thought of seeing our honeymoon pictures, not wanting to witness him with anyone else. Mark, in response, reassured her, claiming he belonged only to her, so those pictures meant nothing. She kept questioning why he wanted to marry me, and he bluntly said he had been with me for so long that he was just comfortable staying with me. In response, Martha shared that it was the same with her husband. She had stuck around because he could give her everything she had ever desired. They kept chatting about how adeptly they had concealed their affairs, convinced we would never find out. Shockingly, they had also planned to meet during our honeymoon. She had somehow persuaded her husband to vacation at the same destination we were heading to. The plan was for them to act surprised upon seeing us and then find a way to secretly meet up. I didn't even realize, but tears were streaming down my face by this time. The pain felt heavy in my chest, making it hard to catch my breath. I decided to take screenshots of all their messages from last year. The rest of the day, I walked around in a daze, their betrayal echoing in my thoughts. I just did not know how to confront him regarding this. To make matters worse, Mark called me in the evening with an excuse that he had to work late. This call was the final blow, crushing the last shreds of hope in my already broken heart. I lay in our bed the entire night, consumed with emotions, as I continued to read their messages from the screenshots I had taken on my phone. My initial shock slowly started turning into a blend of anger and sadness. I couldn't fathom how Mark could betray our relationship, especially as we were on the brink of celebrating our love. Planning our romantic getaway while he secretly schemed with his affair partner felt like a harsh twist of fate. I decided that I had enough of this and wanted him to feel what I was feeling. Revenge brewed in my mind as I pondered the perfect way to turn the tables on Mark. Mark returned late at night, and I pretended to be asleep so I didn't have to bother talking to him. This morning, the first thing on my agenda was tracking down Martha's husband on Facebook. I sent him a message asking for a meetup to discuss something crucial about Martha. I emphasized the need for discretion, and I'm hoping he keeps it from her. As I jot down this post on Reddit, I'm eagerly awaiting his response. Mark has no idea what I am planning for him. He has no inkling that I am about to reveal his affair to everyone, stripping away the last shreds of his dignity. I plan to forward Martha and Mark's messages, not their explicit pictures, to each of his coworkers on their work group chat via Mark's phone. I am going to make sure everyone knows why I'm going to call it quits. For now, I have chosen to play along with Mark, acting as though I'm oblivious to his deceitful plans. So, Reddit, do you think my plan is taking things too far? Will I be the hole if I expose Mark's affair, as well as ruin Martha's relationship with her husband? Update 1. Martha's husband, Jack, replied back to me on Facebook. I had been on edge for a couple of hours waiting for his response. When he asked why I wanted to meet, I spun a little white lie about planning a birthday surprise for Martha. Given that people knew my husband and Martha were close, I prayed that he would not see through my lie and agree to meet up. We ended up meeting at a cafe near his workplace. When we sat down with our coffees, he straight up called out my lie, pointing out that Martha's birthday wasn't around the corner. I sheepishly smiled remorsefully and insisted that it was crucial for us to meet as it involved my fiancé and his wife. His brow furrowed in confusion, and I pulled out my phone to show him all the screenshots I had taken from Mark's laptop. He went through all of them and was just as shocked as I was. I continued to explain everything, spilling the beans about Mark and Martha's affair. Jack's jaw tightened, and he just shook his head in disbelief. He asked me how long I had known about this, to which I informed him that I had just found out about it last night. I could see the hurt in his eyes, like he couldn't believe his own wife would do this. I questioned Jack about their upcoming vacation plan, and he gave me this puzzled look. I laid it out for him, revealing that my fiancé and Martha had schemed this whole thing. I told him how they wanted all of us to end up at the same place, all this to pull off a fake surprise and actually have a secret rendezvous. The whole thing left Jack even more bewildered, and I could see his face change colors. I could sense Jack going through the same roller coaster of emotions that I had been on, and I felt sorry for the both of us. Jack looked up at me, sharing how he had no clue Martha could pull off something like this behind his back. Then, Jack dropped a bomb. They were trying for a baby, planning to move to a bigger house and start fresh. He revealed that he had noticed a slight change in her tone and her attitude, but had attributed it to work stress, as she often stayed out late working. I opened up to Jack, sharing how Mark had been pulling the same act with me since last year, glued to his phone, and when I called him out, he tried to mess with my head and gaslight me. Jack then asked me what I planned to do next with the evidence I had collected. I laid out my plan honestly, explaining how it involved his wife too. I said I would keep Martha's name out if he wasn't cool with it, but Jack surprised me. He shook his head, saying, "Martha betrayed me too by getting involved with my fiancé, so I had every right to spill the beans." I nodded my head in agreement and asked Jack about his next course of action. He shared that after seeing their convo, he could not see a future with Martha anymore. He had always wanted to start a family, but what she had done to him, he did not want her to be the mother of his children. It was clear he was gearing up for a divorce. Jack requested all the screenshots I had taken through airdrops so he could show them to his lawyer. Before he left, we exchanged numbers. Jack gave me a heads up to first break up with my fiancé before I revealed his dirty truth in case he reacted violently. I assured him that was my plan, as I was planning to quietly move out of our house while my fiancé was at work tomorrow, leaving him to return to an empty place. I have got a lot on my plate in the next few days as I put my plan into action. I will circle back with an update once everything's in motion. Update 2. I know it's been a few weeks since my last update, and I would like to reassure everyone that I am perfectly fine, and I am doing well. Everything went well as I had planned. First, I moved out of our house while Mark was at work. I asked my brothers to help, and we quickly moved my stuff to my parents' place. Everyone had already been informed about the situation, so they were more than supportive. I thought about leaving a note for Mark explaining the breakup, but in the end, I chose to depart without any explanation. I wanted him to feel the weight of my absence, tossing and turning at night, questioning why I left. I removed the engagement ring and put it on his dining table, as I wanted nothing to do with him anymore. I removed all our pictures from social media and blocked him from everywhere. Even though I was heartbroken and knew that I would eventually break down crying again, my parents comforted me, emphasizing that discovering the truth before marriage spared me from enduring this pain and heartbreak later on. Their words resonated, and I found solace in the agreement that, tough as it was, knowing the reality now was a silver lining for my future. True to form, Mark began bombarding my parents with a barrage of calls and text messages, inquiring about my whereabouts. I could envision him arriving home, finding all my things vanished, and the ring left on the dining table. He kept begging my parents to give him a chance to explain to me. My parents, who have always been protective of me, stood firm, shielding me from Mark's attempts to reach out. They made it clear to him that there was nothing he could do to mend the relationship. My father, with a firm resolve, expressed his disappointment and instructed Mark not to show up in front of him ever again. Imagining Mark's fear, I couldn't help but smile, knowing he had always been scared of my 6 feet 0 inches tall ex-military father. Mark's attempts to contact me ceased after my dad's stern warning. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of his troubles. I was well aware that Mark rarely used his home laptop, so I had cleverly scheduled a mass email to be sent the next day, spilling the beans to everyone in his office about his year-long affair with Martha. The email included some screenshots of their conversations, poking fun at coworkers and their boss, which made it even more interesting. This was my way of turning the tables and revealing the truth. As you can imagine, the email was sent as scheduled and turned Mark's life upside down. He must have been shocked to realize that I had uncovered his affair. The truth unfolding in that email was probably a jolt he hadn't seen coming. His coworkers must have been shocked and in disbelief as well. After opening the email and seeing all the screenshots, one of his coworkers, Sarah, who had been my Facebook friend for a long time, took the initiative to reach out to me so she could check in with me. It was she who informed me that the explicit content of their conversations, especially the mockery of coworkers and the boss, had them questioning Mark's character. Mark's boss, upon discovering the extent of the inappropriate conversations about her, was understandably furious. The revelation came not just as a personal betrayal to everyone but as a professional scandal that shook the entire workplace. Mark, desperate and fuming, reached out to my parents, but the damage had already been done. The email sent from his own laptop left him with no way to prove I was behind it. The explicit discussions about coworkers that Mark had engaged in with Martha were now coming back to haunt him. The news slowly spread like wildfire, and the professional fallout was severe. In the days that followed, Sarah kept me updated, sharing that Mark faced the brunt of the boss's wrath. The shunning within the workplace intensified, with colleagues distancing themselves. Mark and Martha found themselves isolated in the aftermath of their exposed affair. The ultimate blow came when the boss, deeming their actions as professional misconduct, decided to terminate both Mark and Martha. I could not help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and empathy as I learned about the repercussions he faced in the wake of his actions. Meanwhile, Jack reached out to me as well. He informed me that Martha was fuming and angry that I had exposed the truth about them. He, in turn, gave her a dose of reality by serving her with divorce papers. She must have been shocked, especially given the workplace drama she was still reeling from. Fuming and taken aback, she tried reaching out to Jack, demanding an explanation and a chance to salvage what was left of their relationship. However, Jack, unwavering in his decision, stood firm. He cited the betrayal revealed in their conversations, the affair with Mark, as the breaking point. With the truth finally out in the open, there's a newfound sense of lightness and self-assurance. Despite the relief, some days are undeniably tough. There are moments when I find myself sitting in my washroom, tears flowing for hours as I grapple with the emotional weight of my breakup with Mark. It's a process, a mix of healing and confronting the pain, but transparency has become my anchor in navigating through the storm of emotions. Update 3. It's been 3 months since my last update, and I want to express my gratitude to everyone who sent supportive messages during this challenging time. Though I may not be able to reply to each one, please know that I've read all your messages, and your support means a lot to me. To cope with the aftermath of the breakup with Mark, I've been attending therapy. It's been a valuable tool in helping me navigate the emotional complexities and find a path toward healing. Each day brings its own set of challenges, but talking my emotions out with my therapist has been a therapeutic process and has been instrumental in my journey forward. I did meet up with Mark after he showed up in front of my parents' house, pleading for a chance to explain himself. I reluctantly let him in, and not wanting the neighbors to be disturbed, Mark started explaining why he had the affair, talking about feeling vulnerable and the emotions that led him to betray our relationship. He tried to justify it by saying Martha had seduced him, and he resisted for as long as he could. Mark expressed shock when he found out I knew about the affair and questioned why I never confronted him. I told him it was pretty entitled of him to expect me to wait for his explanation while he was fooling around with his coworker. I made it clear I didn't need an explanation because I didn't want to be with him anymore. Whatever he tried to say didn't matter when I had no interest in anything he had to explain. Mark was about to continue, but I cut him off, saying I didn't want to hear anything more from him. Mark looked taken aback, maybe expecting a different response. He urged me to reconsider my decision and not forget the 4 years we had spent together. I stood my ground, telling him that I could never trust him again. He mentioned how he hated returning to an empty house and planned to move back to his hometown after losing his job. While a hint of remorse crossed my mind, I swiftly reminded myself that all of this was a consequence of his own actions. He tried to push for more conversation, but I shut it down, emphasizing that I was done and didn't want any more explanations or updates about his life. After he realized that I wasn't going to budge, he left, and I closed the door behind him, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. The conversation with Mark served as the closure we needed. I am glad he hasn't attempted to reach out since then. Apart from therapy, I've been putting in effort to secure a new job. My goal is to achieve financial independence, allowing me to move out of my parents' place and into a space of my own. I am grateful for the unwavering support of my family. My brothers make it a point to meet up with me on weekends, ensuring that I am doing okay. Living with my parents again has been a positive change, bringing a sense of familiarity I haven't experienced since college. As I navigate this period of transition, I find myself appreciating the way my life has unfolded. It's a reminder never to doubt my instincts again, which proved to be a reliable guide. This experience, though difficult, has become a catalyst for self-discovery and resilience. Moving forward, I am determined to find solace in the familiar while carving out a new path forward. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Before we start, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Now let's continue. Caught my SIL secretly dating my stalker ex in my own home while she neglected my son, so I sent proof to the whole family. They've cut her off and now she's homeless. Hey guys, so I did something, and I need to know if I messed up or not, because this has had a very bad impact on my sister-in-law's life, and I'm being held responsible for it. So my sister-in-law, Jennifer, fake name, 22F, has been living with me for the past 3 weeks, and it's been fine. We haven't faced any issues as such. She's a nice girl. I have always liked her, and we got along well in the past. I am 30, and so is my husband. We met in college and got married 7 years ago after dating through college, and we got married soon after. We also have a 4-year-old son, Terry. My husband has been living away from home for most of the week because of his work, and he only comes back on the weekends. I also have to work through the week, so it's been lucky that Jennifer has moved in with us because we don't have to spend any money on a sitter. Terry doesn't start kindergarten until next year, and so far, we've been able to avoid sending him to daycare and babysitters because my parents were always ready to take care of him, and my in-laws were too. But we wanted to cut them some SL since they are also getting old. So we thought having Jennifer with us would be a good idea for everyone. Jennifer could have lived with her parents, but my husband thought it would be a good idea for her to live with us because she would get her own personal space with us since my in-laws were kind of overbearing. She works from home so she can keep an eye on our son, and it has been a good arrangement for us so far. She has been living with us because she is just starting out at her job, and her salary is kind of on the lower side because she's working in a brand new company, and they are starting out as well, so she can't exactly afford rent right now, which is why my husband told her that she could move in with us because it was fine with me as well. And the fact that she was ready to take care of Terry when she was at home was just an added bonus. We have known each other for a really long time, and I trusted her, so I didn't think there was anything off about this suggestion. She's nice, quiet, and mostly keeps to herself. On the weekends, we would all spend the day together because I had weekends off, and my husband would come back home during that time. But recently, I started noticing that Terry had been acting very weirdly around Jennifer. Before this, he had never had a problem with her, but since last week or around that time, I noticed that whenever I was at home, Terry would stick to me and refuse to be left alone in a room with Jennifer. At first, I barely picked up on it because I just thought he was being a kid and following me around like most kids do. But then it started getting weird because he was never really clingy and liked to be on his own sometimes, so this was strange behavior. And after a while, I decided that I had to get to the bottom of it because I noticed that he was mostly just following me around whenever Jennifer was in the living room, and he didn't seem to want to be around her. So a couple of days ago, I sat my son down, and I asked him what was bothering him because I had noticed his behavior around his aunt, and I wanted him to tell me the truth about everything. At first, he was very reluctant to talk to me, but I assured him that Jennifer was not in the house, and she would not do anything to hurt him. It was the evening. I had just come back home from work, and Jennifer had told me that she was leaving to spend the night at a friend's place because they had a party going on. So it was the perfect time. Once I had made sure that Terry knew for a fact that Jennifer was not at home, he started talking and told me that he didn't like being with her anymore. My first instinct as a mother was to obviously ask him if she had done anything to him, and thankfully, he said that she hadn't exactly hurt him directly, but he said that he didn't like being locked up in the house all day. I didn't know what that was supposed to mean, so I asked him to elaborate, and he told me that apparently, as soon as I left the house, Jennifer would make sure that she sent him into the nursery and told him to stay there for a couple of hours. He said that he liked exploring the house in the backyard. He didn't like being holed up in one room, but apparently, his aunt had told him that if he tried to escape from the room or if he kicked up a fuss about it, then I would come back home from work and scold him, so he had to stay quiet in that room while he got bored out of his head. I thought it was very strange that she was blocking him in his room because while it wasn't dangerous per se, it was quite weird, and I didn't like the sound of it. Terry told me that he hadn't told me about this so far because he thought that I would be mad at him, but now that I was asking him, he also wanted to let me know that he just really didn't like Jennifer because she would lock him up every day. He said that he wanted to go out in the mornings and that he didn't like being stuck in the room, so I had to do something about it and talk to Jennifer. He made me promise that I would not scold him for this, and neither would Jennifer, so I understood that she had done a number on him, and he was very scared to come up to me and tell me the truth. This was all very concerning, and I probably should have confronted her about it, but instead, I decided to find out what she was doing exactly because if it was something shady, I wanted to have proof of her doing it, and if I confronted her, I probably wouldn't get that. Just to be clear, I didn't have anything against her personally, but if she was doing something shady, then I just wanted to have proof of her so people would believe me. My husband's family is really close, and I didn't want to make any accusations baselessly, so that was my thought process, which is why I called a friend of mine that evening and had him install nanny cams in the living room and in the kitchen. They were hidden quite well, and so there was no way people would have known that it was even there if I didn't point it out to them. Terry was also not aware of the cameras because I was afraid that he might let it slip somehow, so I had to have him distracted while the cameras were installed. But once that was done, I only had to wait until the next day that she would be at home, so I could get to know what exactly she would get up to while I was not at home. She spent that night at her friend's place and then came back the next morning just as I was about to leave for work. We had a nice, normal interaction before I left, and that was it. But I wasn't actually going to work. I was just going to be next door with my neighbor and watching her on the nanny cams. I had already asked my neighbor about it because I wanted to know if she had seen any suspicious activity in and around my house, or if Jennifer had been having any visitors over, and she had said no. She had very graciously allowed me to check out what was going on from her house, so I would be close enough to intervene if things went south. I could see the door of the nursery from the placement of my camera, and sure enough, just like Terry had told me, merely minutes after I had left, Jennifer forced him into the room, even though he kept arguing and didn't seem inclined to go into the room at all. The mics were not close enough to pick up what she was saying, but I could hear the faint sound of arguing in their room. After a while, she shut the door and locked him in. I was very surprised that she did that because Terry was a very quiet child and didn't exactly disturb anybody, so if this was about her work, she had nothing to worry about because she could very well work while keeping an eye on him because he just likes to walk around the house or in the garden. Part of me wanted to rush over to my own house and let my son out, but I wanted to get to know more, so I just let things unfold on their own for a while. I noticed that she was not doing anything, just sitting on the couch and scrolling. That seemed innocent enough, so I couldn't understand why she would lock my son in his room to do that. So I waited for about an hour, and then I noticed that she went to the kitchen, so I switched to the kitchen cameras, and bingo, there it was. She opened the kitchen door to let a guy in, but he was in a hoodie, so I couldn't understand who it was. It wasn't until they were back in the living room and the guy had taken his hoodie off that I realized who it was. It was my ex-boyfriend, Marcus, whom Jennifer knew about only because he was a crazy stalker, and I had been complaining about him a couple of years ago. For some context, Marcus and I had dated for a few months before I met my husband. He and I were not even serious. We had just gone out on a couple of dates and hooked up once. It was in the first few months of college, and soon enough, I realized that we were not meant to be together because he was just very different and too intense for me, so I decided to dump him. 2 weeks later, I started going out with my husband. I honestly didn't think that he would take it too hard because we hadn't even been serious, but apparently, he had really liked me and had even told all his friends about me, so everybody started calling me names for going out with somebody else weeks after my breakup with him. I didn't care about it though because I was with a guy that I really liked, and I couldn't give a crap about what other people thought of me. Besides, my husband was the same as me, and he also didn't care about what Marcus or his friends said. I had made it very clear to him that he and I were not serious, and I had made it very clear to Marcus as well while we were together, so I don't understand why he thought that we would end up together when I had told him that I was not that interested. It was just meant to be a short fling and nothing else. But he went crazy about me. I had to get a restraining order against him a couple of years ago because I was pregnant at the time, and he had started following me around, so that was concerning, and I didn't want anything bad to happen to me or my child. The only reason we even managed to get the restraining order against him was because he had exhibited unstable and psychotic behavior before that as well. After our breakup, and once we had graduated from college, he kept trying to get back in touch with me and would text me every weekend, but I never responded to him. I blocked his account several times, but he would just keep on making new ones, so after a while I just gave up because it was pointless, and it wasn't as if I actually cared or it was hurting me anyway, so I just started ignoring it instead of blocking it. For the record, my husband had known about it all along, and he didn't have a problem with the way that I was dealing with the situation. If things would go too far, he had told me to come to him and we would go to the cops together, but it never got that far, thankfully. However, around the time of my marriage, just as I had announced my engagement, he started calling me and begging me to take him back and cancel the engagement. I answered the call a couple of times just to get him off my back, and I even insulted him, hoping that it would hurt his pride, and then he would stop calling, but he had no pride. He continued to call and only stopped when I got a lawyer involved, and I told him that I had filed a restraining order against him. I was bluffing, of course, but that scared him, and he promised me that he would be back. But for the next couple of years, he didn't bother me apart from a few texts saying that he missed me, and he knew that we were going to be together someday. There was nothing too serious, but that changed when I got pregnant. I didn't announce it until I was in my second semester, but when I did announce it on social media, that's when the stalking started. I didn't notice it for the first couple of days, but then I started seeing a white car with tinted windows following me around wherever I went. It really started freaking me out after a few days, so I decided to tell my husband about it and reported it to the cops. We found out that it belonged to Marcus, and he had been following me around ever since I posted about my pregnancy on social media. When he was brought in, he immediately started begging me on his knees to take him back and said that he didn't even have a problem with the fact that I was carrying somebody else's child. He insisted that I leave my husband and said that I couldn't punish him like this anymore. It was just totally psychotic, and I was really scared, so that's the day that I decided to press charges against him and filed a restraining order. We got one for 2 years. For those 2 years, he didn't bother me, so we didn't need to apply for another. I figured that after one restraining order, he might have gotten his head back on straight and had forgotten about me, so I didn't bother with him after that. He also did not text me or bother me during and after that period of time, so I had completely forgotten about him. But when I saw him in my house chilling with Jennifer and making out with her and stuff, I realized that this was unacceptable. I wasn't jealous like Jennifer is implying, but I was just angry that it's typical of everything that this guy had put me through. She was still with him and had even invited him into my house. The audacity to do that and to expect that she would get away with it while she had locked my son inside his room was crazy. But when I saw that, I saved the recording and immediately rushed over to my house. I also entered through the kitchen door because I didn't want to alert them by entering through the living room door since it would be locked, and I would have to use my keys, and they could probably use that time to help Marcus escape through the back door. So I came in, and I walked into the living room, and I confronted them while they were getting cozy with each other on the couch. I started yelling at Jennifer, pretending that Marcus wasn't even there because I didn't even want to talk to him, and asked her what she thought she was doing because I had thought she was responsible enough to make good decisions while she was home with my son. But clearly that was not the case. She tried to defend herself, saying that she was in love with Marcus, and so was he, and that they had been dating for almost a year now, so I had nothing to worry about. But for me, it was not even about them. I was mad about the fact that she had been lying to me and locking up my son in his room just because she wanted to spend time with her so-called boyfriend, who just happened to be my psychotic ex. It was the fact that she was treating my son badly and was lying to me that it really pissed me off and I couldn't tolerate it. So I told her that she had to leave that very instant, or I would call the police on both of them because I was not trying to let this go. I let Terry out of the room, and in the meantime, Marcus left through the back door after promising me that he was not there to create any trouble for me. But he was just here because he was in love with Jennifer. And Jennifer continued to try and talk me out of kicking her out of the house because right now she had nowhere else to go. But that was not my problem. She should have thought about it before sneaking in my ex-stalker into my house. I told her that there was no way I was going to let her live with us anymore because she had betrayed my trust in the worst way possible, and it was irreversible what she had done. She tried to convince me that Marcus was a different person now. She said that he had gone to therapy for a really long time and was under intensive psychological pressure back then, which is why he had been acting out, and that's why I had to get a restraining order against him, but that apparently changed his life and he got on the right track after that. She told me that she had met him at a bar about a year ago, and he was the one who had approached her first because he had recognized her from the wedding photos, and he wanted to tell her that he was sorry, and since it was not appropriate for him to come and apologize to me, he wanted to have Jennifer convey it to me. And apparently back then she felt pity for him, so she decided to talk to him, and he asked her out on a date at the end of the night. First off, that was incredibly creepy and not romantic in the slightest, like she believed it was because he was around my age and she's a lot younger. She was just 21 at the time, and he must have been around 29, so around 30, and if that's not creepy, I don't know what is. And more importantly, since she had known about his past, had no business bringing him anywhere around me or my family. I don't understand why she thought it would be appropriate for him to come over, especially when I was the one doing her a favor by letting her live with me, even though we were not related by blood. It would have been very easy for me to find a sitter and replace her. There was no need for me to let her live with me, but I liked her, and that's why I had trusted her. But she took the trust that I had in her and tossed it right out of the window. So now, for her to expect that I would still continue to let her live with me and forgive her for what she did was just unreasonable and ridiculous. Besides, it was not even just the thing about Marcus. It was also about how she had been treating my son. Locking Terry in his room so she could canoodle with her boyfriend was not something that I appreciated, and I was not going to let her off the hook for it. So I told her very angrily that she had to leave the house because I was not going to allow her to live with me under any circumstances whatsoever. After a lot of begging and arguing, she finally came to terms with the fact that I had made up my mind and left. The only thing that she had asked of me was that I didn't tell her parents about it because they would be very upset since this was something very wrong. I didn't make any promises. I just stood there silently and watched her leave. After that whole episode, I put Terry down for a nap because it had been a very stressful morning, but I still had to tell my husband about what had happened. And now, here is probably where I might have been the A. There was no need for me to do it, but I was just so angry that I wanted to get back at her for what she did. I was very frustrated that I trusted this person, and instead of valuing my trust and doing right by me, she decided to hook up under my roof with the one person that I hated the most. And I was just so angry about it that instead of sending the footage to my husband, I decided to send it to the family group. And I know that the consequences of doing that would not be good for her because, as I had mentioned before, my husband's family is very close with each other, and they take their relationships quite seriously. Last year itself, my in-laws had cut off one of my husband's aunts because she had been talking crap about my husband, and they were not going to tolerate it. So when I say that they take their relationships very seriously, I mean it. And I knew that when they found out about what Jennifer had been getting up to behind our back, they would be pissed. But despite knowing that, I went ahead with it. And what happened was something that I had expected. Her parents cut ties with her that day and stopped speaking to her altogether. My husband was also really shocked that this happened and that Jennifer would do something like this. He had almost wanted to press charges against her, but I was the one who asked him to drop it because she was going through enough as it was. After I had sent that video to the group, my in-laws called me to apologize on their daughter's behalf and informed me that they would not be speaking to her ever again. They were very upset, which I knew would happen, and my husband had a similar reaction. They have all cut her off, to sum it up, and right now she has pretty much nobody to go live with. I know this because she texted me a few hours ago and told me that I had basically ruined her life by sending that video in the family group. She doesn't really have a lot of friends, and once she does, she can't live with them because they also live with roommates. Some of them live with their parents, and she would find it very weird to live with those friends. She can't live with Marcus either because he lives with his parents as well and they don't know about her yet, and he can't tell them because if they found out that she was related to us, they would lose their heads and he would lose a home as well. So now, basically, she can either find an apartment, which is going to be bad because she can barely afford it on the salary that she has, or she will have to start looking for a better job, but she can't do that while being homeless, so it's a conundrum and I feel really guilty for putting her into that situation. I know that I shouldn't have to, but I just feel bad because she's in trouble right now, and it's all because of me. I don't know. I feel like my reaction might have been a bit too extreme and driven by anger instead of just wanting to do the right thing. And it's not like I didn't know that this was going to happen. I was fully aware of the kind of reaction that my husband's family would have to something like this, and yet, in spite of knowing that, I sent that video to the family group and I feel very responsible for what is happening to her. I talked to my husband about it, and he thinks that I'm overthinking it. This is not really my fault. It's Jennifer's fault, and even if you do give them the benefit of the doubt and believe that Marcus probably has changed for the better, it still doesn't excuse what she did with Terry. She used to lock him in his room for hours to the point where he had developed a fear of being in his room for too long, and we are still trying to deal with it, so she kind of had this coming, and it's very pointless to blame myself for it. This is something that she did to herself, and yet, I can't shake off the feeling that I am responsible for it, and I just feel very bad, especially after the message that she sent me. I can tell that she is desperate right now, and it doesn't help the situation or how I feel about it. AITA for getting my sister-in-law in trouble with her family because she was hooking up with my stalker ex? Update 1. Hey, thanks for the reassurance, you guys. That really helped me deal with the things that have been going on and helped me process a lot of it. Also, some of you have been asking if I have been thinking about taking my son to therapy, and yes, that has been on the table. My husband and I have been through growing around that idea for a while now, pretty much the day that we found out about his sister, so we might start in a couple of days. Thank you so much for the concern, yet again. Update 2. So my husband, his family, and I received an email from Jennifer today, almost 2 weeks after the incident. It was not an apology in the slightest, much to my disappointment. I don't care though. She doesn't need to apologize to me because I know I'm not going to forgive her anyway. But the email was to let us know that she and Marcus were still going strong and that, in spite of our best efforts, they had not broken up yet. She claimed that apparently everything that had happened with me had to happen so that Marcus could eventually meet her, and she could understand that I was jealous of her, but I just had to get over it and accept the fact that he had moved on. I don't even understand where that came from because not once had I ever mentioned that I wanted the attention that Marcus had been giving me. I hated that attention, and I wanted him to be as far away from me as he could be, so no, I was not jealous in the slightest, and she was sorely mistaken if she thought that I had gone public about her affair with Marcus because I was jealous. My husband also thought it was a ridiculous, narcissistic email and decided that the next time she sent us anything, we were just not going to open it at all. It was not even worth reading. One thing is for sure though, reading that email really made me glad that I had sent that photo of us in the family group instead of just to my husband because everybody deserves to know what a horrible person she really was. Update 3. Hi everyone. It's been a year since we cut ties with Jennifer, and from what we hear, she and Marcus got married a couple of months ago and have moved to Canada. She's also pregnant right now. She announced the news about a week ago, and it appears to us that she and Marcus are doing well. Honestly, good for her. The funny thing is that even my husband and I are also expecting a child, and I'm in my second trimester already. Not many people know it, but I guess we're going to make that announcement soon enough. As for Terry, he's very excited to be a big brother, and my husband and I are overjoyed about this, and we are going to make sure that this time we don't screw up by getting a bad babysitter. Now on to the next story. Story 3. Husband and our surrogate had a secret affair and planned to take my baby and money away from me, but their plans fell apart when I discovered the baby wasn't biologically mine. I 33F have been going through one of the worst phases of my life. This past week has been an absolute nightmare, and I feel like I'm losing myself and my sanity, and I don't know what to do. I've been married to James, 35M, for the past 6 years, and we've known each other for the better part of a decade. He meant the world to me, and I loved him with all my heart, just for him to betray me. I don't know what to make of things anymore and need some advice on how to tackle this. I met James on a dating app. This was nearly 9 years ago when I was in college, and it was one of my friends who actually swiped right on him. Back then, I had just come out of a long relationship that ended on a bad note and wasn't exactly looking for another relationship. So, when James messaged me for the first time, I didn't think it would amount to anything serious and replied to him because he was cute and seemed sweet. Before I knew it, he asked me out on a date, and I ended up really enjoying his company. He was funny and very charming. We ended up going on more dates, but things were very casual. Like I said, I was still healing from my past relationship. James knew about how I felt and didn't pressure me into anything. He became more of my friend, and I used to trauma dump on him all the time. He was very patient with me and helped me through a bunch of things that I was dealing with, especially with my family, which I'll get to later. We began meeting almost daily, and even though I promised myself that I was going to be single for a while and not jump into another relationship, I found myself falling for him hard. It was unexpected, even for me, but his charm and patience won me over, and within a few months, I knew I liked him more than friends. I knew that he liked me too, but he also knew that I wasn't interested in a relationship, so he never asked me out. About a year into our friendship, we were definitely falling for each other. He made me so happy and loved, and I finally felt secure enough to ask him out, and we got together officially, much to my parents' annoyance. So, coming to my family, my dad at the time was a businessman and owned shares in many companies, including managing the family business which he had inherited from my grandparents. We were pretty wealthy, and I must admit I grew up in a very comfortable way. It wasn't like my parents spoiled me or anything. However, there was never a point in my childhood where I was deprived of anything that I needed. My dad wanted me to marry an educated, rich man who could handle the family business. James had lost both his parents and didn't have anyone except for his younger brother and his grandma. He didn't have a college education and was at the time working as a waiter, barely making any money. I didn't mind any of that because I loved James. He was my best friend and treated me better than any man had before. Saying that my father wasn't happy with my relationship would be an understatement. I knew that he wasn't going to approve of James because he had a very specific mindset about what he wanted in a son-in-law, and James didn't fit into any of it. When our relationship started getting serious, my dad started openly berating him, saying that he wasn't good enough for me because he was poor and didn't have a job, while I was working and had a well-paying job. He said that James wasn't going to be able to keep up with my lifestyle and that I was going to regret it later, but we stayed together despite his warnings. When James and I got engaged, my father was furious. He said that he couldn't stop me from getting married because I was too stubborn, but he practically pleaded with me to make James sign a prenup. I must admit this wasn't even on my mind, but my father said that many people would do anything for money, and a prenup was a safety net. I honestly found it insulting that he thought that what James and I had wasn't true and that he was only in it for the money. This resulted in a huge argument with my dad. It went to the extent where he threatened to cut me out of the will if I didn't get a prenup. I spoke with James and told him that it didn't matter what my dad said, we loved each other, and I knew that it was true. James said that he too felt insulted that my dad would even bring this up. When I told him my dad was planning to cut me out of the will and out of his life, he told me that he didn't mind signing a prenup if it meant that my parents and I could be together. At the time, I thought that he was being so selfless. I agreed to get a prenup, and it was James who showed me a few ways to get it done. In brief, you can get a prenup which will ensure your assets are protected in case of a divorce, but there are also specific prenuptial agreements that allow you to protect and separate your assets for a specific period before merging them. After the time has elapsed, the prenup is dissolved. This time could range from 8 or 15 years or even longer after marriage. This ensures that your partner is in it for the right reasons. We decided to get a prenup for 8 years, after which it would get dissolved and we would share assets. This seemed to put all of us at peace, as it was a solution to everything. We got married after nearly 4 years of dating. My dad wasn't very pleased, but he finally had to accept it. James moved into my apartment, and for almost a year, I paid for the rent and all the amenities as well as all the bills. I didn't mind doing that because I knew James couldn't afford it, and I didn't want to embarrass him by asking for money, especially when I was earning pretty well and could afford to manage things by myself. James continued to be just as amazing as before, always patient and understanding. He still worked at the restaurant, and I was the one who ended up paying for all our dates, which I also didn't mind. I loved giving him things because I knew that he had had a tough life and didn't have much growing up. After about 2 years of our marriage, I thought that he would get a hold of himself and try getting a better job or at least do a few online courses to get more skills. He, on the other hand, seemed to have lost interest in bettering himself. At one point, he quit his job in the restaurant. I didn't want to put any pressure on him, but at the same time, it was getting difficult for me to manage things by myself. It wasn't like he helped out with any of the housework. He'd lounge around all day or stay out and not even cook me a meal. I just assumed that he was feeling demotivated, and after discussing with him, we decided to sign him up for an online finance diploma so that he'd get some experience. I also felt like it was time we started trying for a baby. I loved kids, and I had always wanted to be a mother. I was an only child, so I wanted more than ever to have a big, happy family, and I felt like we were at a good place to get started on it. I also felt that having a baby on the way would help motivate James to work harder. We tried for ages, but I wasn't able to conceive. When we got it checked out, I was informed that I had endometriosis and a blocked fallopian tube, which explained why I had such painful periods all my life. This diagnosis also made conceiving and pregnancy much harder. This was horrible news, and I took it very badly. I felt like I was useless because I couldn't do this one thing. I did tons of research, took various pills, put myself on a strict exercise regimen, and basically abused my body to increase the chance of pregnancy, but nothing I did worked. I slowly began to lose hope. We had been trying to conceive for a year now with no results. James supported me through everything. He came with me to all the appointments and was always there for me, even when I was at my worst. He told me that he wanted to be a dad, but he didn't want me to ruin my health just for a baby. Now I felt even worse, knowing how badly he wanted a kid. After a while, I began to give up on it. I told myself that I was not going to put my body through this torture, and if I was going to get pregnant, it was going to happen naturally, and I was not going to pressure myself. Barely 3 months later, I got the best news of my life. I was pregnant. Couldn't believe it. James was ecstatic, and so was my family. This was going to be the first grandbaby for both families. I immediately started preparing for the baby. We bought clothes, a crib, toys, and we even began setting up the nursery. Our happiness was short-lived. When I was around 5 months, I lost the baby. I'm not going to get into the details because it hurts too much to even think about it. It was a traumatic time for all of us. It was a baby boy. My grief was indescribable, and I blamed myself for it. The idea of being a mom, even for a short time, made me so happy, and now it was ripped away from me. I stopped going to work for months and didn't have the guts to look at the unfinished nursery. I guess this was when our relationship started changing. I became cold and distant from James. I could tell that he was also grieving, but at that point, I only felt pity for myself. He tried helping me out as much as I could, but I snapped back at him and acted like an idiot when he was just trying to be supportive. It took me months to get over this and reconcile with James, but ever since we lost the baby, I could tell that things had changed. For the next year, we tried to get pregnant, but to no avail, and I almost gave up on the idea of being a mother. This was when James suggested adoption. I had given adoption a lot of thought. Millions of kids needed loving parents in a home, and we could provide that to them. We had more than enough, and we wanted nothing more than to be parents. We started our adoption journey, and it was a long road. After months, we got matched with a birth mom who was expecting twins. We got in touch with her, and she liked us immediately. I couldn't help but get optimistic. We were having twins. Yet again, our happiness was short-lived. Once again, we began prepping. This time, even the nursery was ready. We were then told after the babies were born that the birth mom had changed her mind and was planning to keep the babies. This shattered me. I could not take another heartbreak. It took me even longer to get over this, and I felt lost for a very long time. It was as if nothing we did was working, and I began to hate myself for it. I could see a behavior shift in James too. He was now working at an MNC, and those diplomas had paid off. He wasn't earning as much as me, but now he was contributing to the house. Our relationship had seen better days. All of these blows with the miscarriage and the adoption took a huge emotional toll on both of us, and we were starting to drift away. If it wasn't anything crazy, but I felt like I was closing myself up from him, and instead of talking things through, we just went on with it and let the gap widen. About a year and a half ago, things started getting better for me. I worked harder than ever and managed to get a promotion. James and I went out to celebrate, and we were just chatting about how everything would be perfect if we had a baby. That's when James brought up the idea of surrogacy. I had considered this option while we were trying, but now that I had been through so much, lost the thought of trying again for a baby was just way too taxing. Surrogacy did sound promising, but I didn't want to get my hopes up just for them to be crushed again. James seemed excited, and I didn't want to break his heart. Even though I knew that this might not work, I decided to give this one last chance. Over the next few weeks, we did a bunch of research and decided to go ahead with it. I made it very clear from the beginning that my main priority was my mental health, and I couldn't take another disappointment, so James agreed to manage the whole thing. He said that he'd do all the paperwork, interview potential surrogates, everything, so that I didn't get too invested. I was more grateful than ever for him to step up like this. I got in touch with our doctor, and they began prepping me for an egg retrieval. They pumped me up with hormones, and that affected my mood terribly. After my eggs were retrieved, they were fertilized with James' sperm using IVF, and after a lot of prayers, we found out that we had one viable embryo, a rainbow baby. Despite this, I tried not to get my hopes up. We also managed to find a suitable surrogate. Her name was Emily. She was 24 and was willing to carry our baby. I didn't get involved when it came to choosing a surrogate. James told me that he would handle everything because I was too emotionally exhausted. I liked Emily from the minute I saw her. James showed me all her paperwork. She didn't smoke or drink. Her medical exam was good, and the doctor approved her. She told me that she was doing this because her mom was ill, and she needed the extra money for her treatment. She was working overtime and staying at a hostel to pay the bills while her sister looked after her mom. Her story touched my heart, and I vowed to help out as much as possible since she was giving me the greatest gift. We moved on to the embryo transfer, and we'd usually expect a positive pregnancy test after 15 days, but we weren't getting it. My heart dropped, and I prayed more than ever. The doctor told us to wait a few more weeks before confirming everything. To everyone's relief, 2 weeks later, Emily did a blood test which confirmed pregnancy. A month later, we did the ultrasound, and I saw my baby for the first time. The technician said that the baby looks smaller for its gestational age, but apart from that, everything was fine. I was so relieved that I cried. We paid Emily the first installment, which she sent back to her mom. She told me her mother would never use the money if she knew that it was obtained through surrogacy, and that's why she was staying at a hostel. I felt terrible for her. I spoke with James and asked if it would be possible to have Emily stay with us for the duration of her pregnancy, and he was completely against it. He said that it was better if we didn't get too involved and attached, but after a lot of persuasion, he finally agreed. That way, we could ensure that she ate healthy and didn't have to worry about rent. Plus, we'd always be close by in case of an emergency. Emily began staying with us, and she became a friend to me. I was so grateful for what she was doing for me that I tried to show my appreciation to her in any way I could. I even gave her money every month for her mom's treatment in addition to her normal fee. I went to all the doctor's appointments and made sure that she was eating healthy and staying fit. I started noticing that James and Emily usually behaved very awkwardly around each other. They barely interacted with each other. I'd sometimes catch them having a conversation quietly but stopped as soon as I entered the room. James stopped being affectionate to me when she was around as well. When I asked him about it, he just said that it felt weird that she was carrying his baby. I understood what he meant because it was a bit awkward for me too, so I let it slide. Before I knew it, 9 months had flown by. The baby was still small for their age but was otherwise fine. Finally, our rainbow baby, Jaden, a little boy, was born after nearly 43 weeks of gestation. He was perfect in every way. The first time I got to hold him, I finally felt like everything was worth it just to have him in my arms. I was forever indebted to Emily. We took him back home, and we started settling into parenthood. It was everything I dreamed of. I didn't even mind the sleepless nights. James was working overtime while I looked after the baby. He had gotten a promotion and was very busy on most days. He'd sometimes even get work calls in the middle of the night and come home super late. I began getting annoyed because he was barely spending time with the baby, and I wanted them to bond, but he kept making excuses. Around 4 months later, I had to go to work to handle an important client. I hated leaving Jaden, but they had specially requested to meet me just for a few hours. I requested James to be with our son that day because I didn't want him to be with a stranger, and he agreed. I finished up with work faster than usual and rushed home to be with Jaden. To my shock, I saw that Jaden was crying in his crib, and James was nowhere to be seen. I rushed to our bedroom only to find it locked. I could hear voices coming from inside and bang the door. After what seemed like ages, James opened the door looking flushed, and when I searched the room, I found Emily hiding under my bed. Finally clicked. They were having an affair. Even though I refused to believe what I was seeing, I knew it was true. James tried to explain that it was a mistake and that this had never happened before, while all Emily could do was stand there embarrassed. I trusted them the most. I had opened my heart and my house to Emily and treated her like my sister. I had given James everything he wanted only to be betrayed like this. They had no regard for me but had also ignored Jaden when he was wailing downstairs. I was so disgusted. I grabbed Jaden and went straight to my parents' house and explained everything. As expected, James came begging for my forgiveness and saying that it was a mistake. I had been cheated on before and this was a deal breaker. The fact that he cheated on me with Emily of all people hurt me more than anything, and there was nothing he could say that would make me change my mind. I could not be with him anymore and told him that I wanted a divorce. He cried and protested and fell at my feet pleading with me, but my dad called security and kicked him out. A few weeks later, I got in touch with my lawyers and served him the papers. Since we had been married for only 7 years, the prenup still held good, and I didn't owe him any money. At that moment, I was glad that my dad made me sign the prenup. Otherwise, half my assets would have been lost to this cheater. When it came to the custody of Jaden, I decided that 50-50 custody would be best because I wanted him to grow up with a dad. James's entire personality changed after he found out that I was serious about the divorce. All the begging and crying stopped as soon as he saw the papers. One evening, he called me and told me that he wanted to meet me and discuss the details of the divorce. We met up, and I was shocked to see that he had Emily with him. He looked very pleased. He handed me a document containing his terms for the divorce, and my jaw dropped to see that he wanted full custody of Jaden because he claimed that I wasn't mentally sound to take care of him and that I suffered from frequent bouts of depression and BPD. He requested $155,000 in monthly child support and that the baby would be entitled to all the money I would receive from my dad through his will. I immediately rejected this. There was no way James was going to get full custody of Jaden. He said this was all a part of his master plan. He and Emily had been together for 2 years. He chose her to have the baby so that when he eventually left me after 8 years of marriage when our prenup expired, he could be with her and our son and take half my money with him. Unfortunately, I had caught him cheating, and the prenup was still valid. Because he claimed that I was mentally unsound, he wanted full custody of Jaden, and since I was richer than him, I owed him that crazy sum in child support. I couldn't believe that he could be so devious. The fact that he had been planning all this for years, and I had no idea, it hurt to know that Emily was in on this, especially after for everything I did for her. Remember her sick mom? All lies. She was just taking my hard-earned money and spending it on herself and James. They took advantage of my nativity just for money, but there was no way I was going to let them take away my son. I asked James if I meant nothing to him. My heart broke when he said that he initially did love me, but after we lost the baby, he lost interest and was only planning on being with me till the prenup expired. This hit me like a pile of rocks. I told my lawyers everything, and they agreed that the child support he was asking for was insane. They said that they would do everything to ensure that I had custody of my child. My lawyers also advised me to get a maternity test. I found this absurd because there was no way that Jaden wasn't mine, but they just wanted to make sure. I did the test even though I found it ridiculous. The results made me collapse. He came back saying that I was not Jaden's biological mother. I didn't see how this was possible because my eggs were used, and the implantation was done. I am numb. I don't know what happened. I just feel so defeated. I have got in touch with James, and he claims that there has been some mistake. I have sent in another sample just to be sure. My lawyers say this is good because now they can drastically bring down the child support until they get answers. Honestly, I don't want anything. I just want my son. This has to be a big mistake. The results are due anytime, and I've made James and Emily do tests as well. This has to be an elaborate prank, right? I don't know what to do. What do I do? Update 1. Hi. Just got back the tests. It is confirmed that I am not Jaden's bio mom. James is his bio dad, and Emily is his bio mom. I just got the news yesterday, and I have a lot to tell you, but I just can't bring myself to write it down because then it just feels too real. My thoughts are all over the place and I feel like crying all the time. I just thought I'd let you know since so many of you wanted an update. Hopefully, I'll be able to share the full story when I don't feel like garbage. Update 2. Hello. Firstly, I want to apologize for that previous update. I was all over the place and at the lowest I'd ever been in my life. Many of you wanted an explanation of what exactly happened, and I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. Now that it's been a couple of months, I finally feel like I can write things down. So yeah, James came clean about everything. He said that it was always his plan to have a kid with me so that he could get child support. They did do the IVF using our embryo, but apparently that didn't result in a pregnancy. James knew that I was not going to try for another baby if this failed, and this was his only option. Once he and Emily found out that the IVF failed, they tried to have a baby naturally, and it worked almost immediately since Emily was pumped up with all the fertility drugs. Remember when I said that we got a negative pregnancy test and later was told that Jaden was small for his gestational age? That's because it was not my embryo. That is also why Jaden was almost 4 weeks overdue. It all made sense now. My lawyers also went through all the paperwork that Emily showed me regarding the surrogacy, the background check, etc. Everything was fake. James got them made so that he could convince me and the doctors that she was a credible candidate. I even showed them all the transactions that I made to Emily for her mother's treatment. They confirmed that Emily's mother was alive and well, and that she had spent the money on buying a new car and well as other material things. My lawyers have started making a pretty solid case against them, and there is no way that they are going to get custody of Jaden, even though he is biologically their son. In other news, Emily has separated from James and claims that she had no idea about his master plan and that had taken advantage of her by promising her that he was going to marry her and give her money. She said she was emotionally manipulated and made to undergo the surrogacy under pressure from James, even though she didn't want to. She also claims that he was the one who faked all the documents and told her to lie about her mom to get more. She said that once the IVF failed, she was again manipulated into having a baby with James so that their plan wouldn't fail, and they would still get child support after the divorce. She now says that she wants nothing to do with James or Jaden and just wants a peaceful life. I don't know how much of what she is saying is true, but for now it looks like she is playing the victim card. For all I know, she could be very well telling the truth because James manipulated me too, and I had no idea until very recently. James claims that she was in on it the whole time, but all the evidence points towards him. As for me, it took me a long time to accept that Jaden was not mine. I was also scared that I was going to lose him to his bio parents because of this. Now that Emily doesn't want custody, and James might be a felon, his custody directly falls to me. I'm not sure about the legal aspect, and we have a divorce hearing next week, so I'll keep you posted. Update 3. Hey guys, just wanted to clear things up. Surrogacy is legal in my country. We have very specific guidelines and rules which we have to adhere to. That's why it takes ages to get matched with a surrogate, and they had to have all the paperwork to back them up. So, no, surrogacy itself is not illegal here, but forcing a woman to be a surrogate against their wishes, as well as faking all of these documents, is a crime. Emily also claims that he forced her to have the baby even though she didn't want to. Considering all of this, the court sentenced James to 8 years in prison for his crimes. He pleaded innocent to everything, and the trial lasted for almost 3 months. He only pleaded guilty after they said that they would reduce his sentence from 12 years to only 8 if he confessed. I never thought that any of this would happen, never in my wildest dreams. I didn't know that I was married to such a vile, disgusting human, and I feel like he needs to serve more time. Our divorce was finalized a month ago. All of James's plans to get custody backfired on him. He is never going to get custody of Jaden, and since Emily wants nothing to do with him, I get full custody of Jaden. Yes, I am not his biological mother, but my name is on his birth certificate. I was the first one to hold him and to love him. I have loved him since before he was born. It doesn't matter what anyone says. Jaden is my son. He was always my son. When the judge handed over custody to me, I cried with joy. I thought I was going to lose him forever, but I am so grateful to have him. Update for hey wow, it's been ages. I thought I'd just pop in to say hi and give a small update. Jaden and I are doing great. He turned 1 a few months back, and we had a blast celebrating his birthday. Motherhood had been the best thing. Yes, we got off to a terrible start, but I've promised myself to make sure that the rest of Jaden's childhood is going to be amazing. I'm going to work hard to make sure he is loved. James is in jail, and I haven't heard from Emily since everything got finalized. I am trying to make the most of the situation and move on. I know that time heals everything. Even though it feels so real now, I am so happy I have Jaden, and that's all that matters. Life feels surreal, but we have to keep moving forward and hope for better days. Now on to the next story. Story 4. Wife said she wanted to reconcile with her childhood friend and went for it, but then I caught them kissing in a hotel. So I told everyone about it, made her workplace bad, and now I'm divorcing her. Let me get right into it. My wife and I met when we were both in our senior year in college. We started talking based on an interest in the same TV shows in anime, and then we eventually fell in love. To be honest, it felt so right at the time, and I didn't have too many moments where I ever doubted our relationship. There were quite a few stupid fights early on, especially regarding guys she was hanging out with, but I was always reassured. Looking back, I was probably gaslight, or is it gaslit? But things always ended up resolved, probably the only red flag I ignored. Anyway, we dated for 4 years, tied the knot, and have been married for 3 years on top of that, so we're heading to our 30s. Anyway, since we met in college, we lived our childhoods very far apart. I grew up in the United States, but I found out that before she lived here, her family lived in Ecuador, at least until she was about 12. Once she got here, she grew up in Washington. She would occasionally tell me stories about her childhood in Ecuador, and for someone like me who has never left the country, one day soon these stories were pretty interesting. It was through these stories that I learned about a really close childhood friend of hers called Daniel. From the sound of things, he had one of those innocent juvenile crushes on her, though she claimed she couldn't remember whether she felt the same way about him back then. She leaned towards there being very little emotion of that sort. She and Daniel hadn't been in contact much, though he had sent her a friend request on Facebook 2 or 3 years ago. They did a bit of catching up following the friend request, but soon after it was nothing more than occasionally reacting to each other's posts on the platform, as far as I know at least. Now the mess really started when she got a message from Daniel saying that he'd be moving to the United States. He had graduated school, had worked a bit in Ecuador, and now he was ready to jump into the US job market. Great for him. The problem was, my wife seemed to be the only person that this guy really knew in the US, and he really wanted them to meet up so they could reconnect, and he could also learn the basics of living in this country that was new to him. To be honest, I didn't really think there was much wrong with this. They last saw each other when they were kids. There was little interaction as adults, none of it in person, and both she and Daniel seemed to be happily married. His wife would be coming along with him after all. So the time finally came around and Daniel flew over to the United States. He was going to start working in California, but his flight plan was to come straight to Dulles and go by road to Cali. My wife offered to pay for his road trip so it'd be less inconvenient for him. In fact, she didn't consult me before she agreed to pay for him, but he chose to make the trip to see her, so I'd have preferred if he took the brunt financially. But at that time, I thought I might have been a jerk considering this was a guy from South America about to start a new life, so maybe it was a huge help for all the financial weight not to be on him. I drove my wife to meet him at a public park and noticed that there was no one else with Daniel. I knew he traveled with his wife, so I expected to see her there. After the pleasantries, I asked about his wife and he said she went straight to sea. I felt a little twinge of unease at that since I had kind of removed any worry from my mind based on the fact that his wife would be around, but it wasn't improbable that she wouldn't want to spend the entire day in Washington, so I let it go. And since they were likely going to spend the whole day reminiscing in Spanish, and I really didn't want to be a third wheel, I took off. They'd have the day to themselves. She'd show him the sights of Washington, and I'd come pick them up whenever they were ready to call their day to a close. Again, this was a childhood friend that she hadn't seen in years, so as much as I was a bit jealous that she was spending the whole day with another man, I wasn't too worried about any risk. It didn't seem likely that anything could happen between them so suddenly and without arrangement. It was several hours later when I got a message from my wife saying that it'd be fine if I picked her up at any time from them. She sent me the address, and it was the bar we frequented the most. Again, I felt a little jealous, but it's a great bar to drink at and converse, so it made sense. As long as no one had too much to drink, things would be fine. About 15 minutes after she sent the message, I left the house and made my way to the bar she was at. I got there and saw her and Daniel sitting at the usual spot, laughing intensely. I walked up to them, and while my wife smiled on seeing me, the laughter kind of faded out. The two of them didn't seem to be very eager to leave, but I guess my presence was like at home and bringing their great night to a close. My wife said bye to Daniel and hugged him. I shook his hand and we all left the bar together. My wife ordered him an Uber to take him home, and we drove back to our house. "So how was your day with Daniel?" That was the first thing out of my mouth as I took off my coat after entering the house. She seemed very happy to recount everything that happened. And again I felt jealous. But wouldn't you say it'd make sense to be happy about reconnecting with someone that you hadn't seen for a very long time? I chalked it up to my insecurity and listened to her, and she went on and on about how they walked through the park and chatted, how she took him to a museum, how they got a quick bite to eat, and how they ended up at the bar. I had an odd feeling towards the end of her story, though, because she had a lot of details to share about what they talked about in all the other places, but they didn't seem to talk about much beyond the sports game that was on at the bar, at least according to how she recounted the story. I didn't pry, though, because I hate seeming overly suspicious and insecure, and I really had nothing solid to be wary of. The rest of the night went fine, though, and I got over the niggling feeling I had. The next morning, literally seconds before I walked out of the house for work, my wife quickly squeezed and that she might be going to see Daniel. Yeah, at that point, I had a lot more than a niggling feeling. We had a conversation that went something like this. "What? Isn't he supposed to be heading to California today? Do you want to see him before he heads to the bus station? Or what? He'll push his departure back by a day. Just a day. He'll go tomorrow, but there's so much to talk about and I don't know the next time I'll see him. When did you find out he was staying an extra day? I mean, we talked about it yesterday at the bar, but nothing was confirmed yet. He let me know he made up his mind this morning." I kind of just stood there dumbfounded with a sinking feeling in my gut. Something just seemed wrong. Daniel wasn't a bad-looking guy. I'd say I looked better, though, if I do say so myself, so I started to wonder whether she felt some kind of spark for him that wasn't there when they were kids. I must have stood there without saying anything for quite some time, because she said, "Bae," to catch my attention, and in response to that, all I said was, "Okay." I had to get to work, so I turned to leave. Right then, she must have felt something was wrong, because as I stepped through the doorway, she said, "I have to show up at work, so I won't spend much time with him, baby." I didn't bother replying. Now let's fast forward to when I was at work. Honestly, I was having a pretty hard time concentrating, because I had a very unpleasant feeling about my wife and Daniel. To be honest, I struggle with insecurity sometimes, so I had to keep asking myself whether I was overthinking things. I tried to keep my mind under control, but I failed, and I decided to ask to leave work early. My boss loves me, so that wasn't hard, especially since it was such an unusual request for me. I was granted permission, and off I went. I started to feel very crazy at this point, especially because I did something I'm not super proud to recount, but it was worth it. I've always been good at thinking things through, so the first thing I did was to park my car at a shopping mall. After that, I took an Uber to a Hertz place and rented a very basic vehicle. I drove it to the hotel that my wife mentioned Daniel was staying at, and I found a place to park that gave me a good view of the hotel's entrance. In case you're confused, I obviously couldn't drive my own car because my wife might have recognized it. Again, I felt crazy and stupid during all of this because I wasn't even sure she was at the hotel. If she was to be believed, they would have taken another day out on the town. My wife would know better than to stay in a hotel room with another man alone, even if it was just a talk, because putting yourself in such situations is a recipe for trust issues. I'm not joking when I say I sat in that car for 4 hours straight. I was hungry, and I needed to pee, but I was scared that any time I took off could be when I'd miss what I was hoping, or really not hoping, to see. But almost as soon as it started becoming unbearable, I caught a familiar figure emerging from the hotel. It was my wife and Daniel. I remember trying to make excuses for her in that moment. They were coming out of the hotel, but I had no idea what had happened between them. Maybe she wasn't in his room. They could have been in the lounge or at the restaurant or bar. But the fact she was there so late in the day made me uneasy since she had told me she wasn't going to spend much time. I was tussling with doubting her and trusting her in that moment. Well, the tussle lasted until I saw a car pull up in front of the entrance. It was an Uber, I assumed. They both walked up to it, and he opened the door for her, and before she ducked into the car, I watched them share a deep kiss. I don't know whether time slowed down or exaggerated my perception, but the kiss went on for about 10 seconds. I still can't remember how I was able to regain clarity of thought briefly, but I managed to take a video of the last 3 seconds of the kiss. Then she hopped in the car, he closed the door, and her car left, and I sat right there in the stupid rental car, unable to process any more thoughts. My brain felt frozen. I think I sat there for an additional hour before I went to return the rental. I didn't go back home that night. I told her I had to work late, and I'd stay the night at the office. She sounded disappointed, but she didn't seem wary because this was something I do frequently. I planned to sleep in a hotel, but then something occurred to me. My wife knew I wasn't coming home, and if she wasn't expected at home, she likely wouldn't have cut her night with Daniel short. I was still going to sleep in a hotel, but this time it would be the exact hotel that Daniel was staying at. I just had a very strong suspicion that she would go back to the hotel to spend the night with him and try to leave in the early hours of the day before I could possibly get back. So just like that, I went back, taking my car this time, and I booked a room. Fortunately, they weren't fully booked. It was dark already, so she wouldn't find it easy to spot my car, especially where I parked it. I went into the lobby of the hotel and sat in the most inconspicuous location I could find that had a view of the door, though it was a pretty big lounge, so I wasn't exactly hidden. I had gotten to the hotel just 35 minutes after I had called her, so I hoped I had gotten there before her if she was even going to come. Almost as soon as the thought crossed my mind, who do I see walk in? And she was wearing a certain red dress that I had never been too shy to let her know how much I liked. I'll admit that all I wanted to do was get evidence that she was there and confront her with it later, but I think I lost my mind in that moment. I stood up and rushed over to her before she could ascend the stairs, and I tapped her on the shoulder to get her to turn around. The shock on her face was a sight I could never forget. There were a few seconds of absolute silence between us, and I could see her jaw moving like she wanted to say something, but she really had nothing smart to say. "What are you doing here?" That was what I was able to say through clenched teeth, and she could definitely see I was mad. "You're here to see Daniel, aren't you?" Through a ridiculous amount of stuttering, she managed to let me know that yes, she was there to meet with Daniel, but no, she wasn't going to wait for long in his hotel room. They were going to go out so she could take him to some kind of party or event or something. I asked her why I didn't know anything about this supposed party, but she only said it must have slipped my mind. I wasn't planning to go before. I actually remember seeing her hands trembling, but she tried to keep them steady against her body. "But what are you doing here?" "I'll show you," I said, and I brought out my phone and played the very brief clip I had of her and Daniel kissing in front of the hotel. "Now, fellas, I've never hit a woman and I never will, but when she said you were spying on me as her only response to the video, I won't lie, I felt the urge to. And because of that, I only told her, 'Don't come home tonight,' before I turned to walk out. She tried to grab my arm and say some stupid words to appeal to me, but I was scared of what I would do if she said something really idiotic in her defense, so I left. I went back home, and in the 3 days since then, she hasn't come home. I know she's fine because her sister that lives across town asked me what was wrong. Apparently, my wife was too ashamed to admit to anything, but I didn't tell her anything. So now what I really need is advice. I need to hit her where it hurts because she can't play me like this and get away with it. I'll be reading your comments, everyone. Edit. You've all given me a lot to read over the last few days, and I'm very grateful to you all. It's been very tough for me trying to figure out what to do through such heavy emotions. But yeah, I've decided to proceed with a divorce as the first step, like almost all of you recommended. I want to take things a step further with my wife, but I'm not quite sure how yet. I also have some plans for Daniel, but I'll keep that under wraps for now. Hopefully, I'll have an update for you all in some weeks, and hopefully not longer than that. Update. Hey everyone. I'm glad to say that the update you've all been waiting for is here, and I'm just as happy to be telling you all about it as you will probably be to read it. The first step for me was the divorce. I've got a friend from college who is now a pretty successful divorce lawyer, and he was the first person I gave a call after getting my mind settled. Papers have been filed, she's been served, and while we haven't come to a solid agreement on anything, we don't have children, and our income isn't too far apart, so it's unlikely that I'll be paying much alimony, if any. I can live with that to be away from her. We don't own a house and have any kids yet, so fortunately we won't have to go to war over those things. I'll leave her with the apartment since the rent was ridiculous, but she loved the view so much. Couldn't care less. Oh, she called me the other day, crying and crying, asking whether she could come to the house to talk things over with me. I told her she could say whatever she wanted to say over the phone, but she just kept weeping, talking about how she was all alone, and she just made a mistake, and a lot of other nonsense through her tears. I might have folded, but all I needed to do was quickly look back at what she had done, and it was like smelling salts to me, brought me straight back to my right senses. I knew Daniel's name, and I found him online pretty easily. His wife wasn't hard to find after that, and all I had to do was tell her everything I knew about the little detour her husband took on their trip to America. The video I had helped seal the day. She was mad, but it was easy for me to be there for her because I was in the same boat as her on opposite ends. We've been talking a lot, and she's a very attractive woman. I'm not saying I'm planning to do anything, but it'd certainly be poetic justice for both of us. We'll see how that develops. Anyway, she's gonna leave his ass, which is exactly what I wanted. I just hope she doesn't backtrack considering she came to America dependent on him. For my wife, I had to be a lot more heartless to get at her. First step, I created a group of her closest family members and friends and let them all know, including the sister who she still refused to tell what had happened. I didn't share the video with them, but I was ready to pull the trigger on that in case anyone chose to doubt me out loud. Next, I didn't have any way to make her lose her job, but I did think I could make the workplace a bit more uncomfortable for her. This part was tough because I didn't want to have to deal with a whole defamation thing, even though it was true. Fortunately, I know someone who works in the same building as her, though on a different floor, so I chatted him up and let him know about how I had separated from my wife, yada yada. I asked him whether he knew anyone on my wife's floor, and he let me know that he did. All I asked of him was to plant a seed in that person's ear, and hopefully the rest would spread like gossip does. I told him I owe him lunch if he did me right. You should have seen the smile on my face when my wife called me fuming, asking why I would tell her job about what happened. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. After all, I didn't know anyone at her office. She knew that was true, but she kept saying, "You must have told someone somehow. You must have." I could hear her fighting back tears as she shouted at me, but I only enjoyed it as she did. She also screamed about the fact I told everyone close to her about what she had done, but I only told her to be thankful I hadn't sent them the video as well. She promised she was going to make the divorce hell for me, but honestly, I'm ready for it. I should have waited till things were finalized before my revenge, but I guess I was too eager to get back at her. Either way, I'm happy being free of her. There's no point sticking around with cheaters. I'd rather be single than be with someone who is unfaithful, and if these are the cards the universe has dealt me, I'll take them. There are better things for me ahead. So thank you all for listening, and I hope you were able to learn something from my story. It wasn't fun to go through, but I'm still young, and I'll try my best to never waste my time on a woman like her again. Now on to the next story. Story 5. Wife cheated on me with multiple men while I was depressed and gave me the excuse that she couldn't handle my depression anymore. So I made sure the divorce left her with nothing. I 37M have been married to my wife 36F for 9 years now, but we've known each other since high school, so needless to say she's one of the people on the planet who knows the most about me, and I can also say that I know a whole lot about her, having grown into adulthood together. For the sake of telling this story publicly, let me just say that her name is Daphne. It breaks my heart to even need to have to ask for advice on this matter, but I honestly don't know what to do, and my mental state isn't helping at all. I might need to give you all a bit of background so you can understand things a lot better. I don't want to give too many details, but I had a very rough time growing up, if that's not an understatement. I grew up with a mother addicted to drugs and a great father who met his end due to junkie friends of my mother's. I was the one who found him and had to call 911, and I don't know if I can ever fully appreciate the extent to which that scarred me. I will be honest and say that I grew up resenting my mother and women in general very strongly. I entered foster care with a very kind foster family, and I was unnecessarily a jerk to many of the people in the house. But with time their love softened me, though I was still holding on to a lot of pain quite naturally. I started seeing a therapist very early in my life because I've been dealing with a lot of mental health issues, but I always try to stay positive and fight through things. Meeting Daphne in high school was also a major boost in my happiness, and we were friends for several years before the notion of anything romantic even started between us. Again, I was extremely resentful towards women, and I think having a healthy relationship with Daphne sort of helped me push out of that. Anyway, we both graduated high school and went to the same college where we both graduated once again. Honestly, everyone could tell that we'd likely end up together, but I guess trying to be the edgy young adult that I used to be, I would deny it and act oblivious to even the mere possibility of ending up with her. About 2 years after graduating from college, I officially asked her to be my girlfriend. I proposed to her a year later, and 9 years ago we got married. Daphne wasn't there through the absolute hardest times of my life, but she's always known about my mental health struggles, and she has been there to witness some of my hardest battles. I've always apologized for the way I might treat her in the moments or the way she needs to baby me, but she's always been so kind, and she's always said that she doesn't mind. I even asked her at several points in our relationship whether she was sure about being burdened with me and my problems, but she always claimed that she was and that she'd go the entire way with me. I think that's enough background. You should be able to understand what I have to say with this much background, so let me try my best to tell it. The real problem started about 4 months ago when I was dealing with a pretty bad episode of depression. Honestly, as much as I've pushed forward in life, some of the things that happened way back in the past still have a pretty strong hold on me, and it's hard for me to completely let go of them no matter how many therapy sessions I choose to attend. Though bad episodes have become fewer and farther apart the older that I've gotten, that episode lasted about 5 days, and usually Daphne is with me as much as she can be, but it was very clear that something was very different this time around. She stuck around the first 2 days, but halfway through the third day she seemed cold, and she told me that she had something that she had to do. I wasn't in the headspace to really inquire about what it was she had to do, so she left and came back much later in the night. I'm not too sure what the time was though, and the same thing happened in the next 2 days. It was the final day that I noticed that she came back around 1 a.m. I didn't have much to say about it though, again because of how I was feeling. It was only when I was fully out of the whole thing that I started to think about it with a clear head. I've known her for about 2 decades, and that was very unusual behavior, so it stayed on my mind for quite some time. To be honest, cheating wasn't part of what jumped into my head because you think that you know people, right? I considered bringing it up, but for some reason I decided to let the whole thing go, which was likely a dumb move now. It wasn't until about 2 months later when I had a really bad day that I realized that something seemed to be up. Just like the other time, she basically disappeared halfway through the day, and I knew that something was really wrong at this point. It made the day much worse because it seemed like Daphne was avoiding me, which was very unusual behavior from her. Fortunately, this was just a bad day and not a proper episode of depression, so I bounced back by the end of the day, though she wasn't back by that point. As soon as she stepped back into the house, I paused the game that I was playing, and I asked her where she had been, not in an accusatory tone as far as I know, but she responded to me in an extremely defensive manner, asking why I was coming at her like that. Came out of nowhere, and I was really shocked because I was pretty sure that I hadn't spoken unkindly in any fashion. She seemed ready to explode at me, so I took a breath and asked her again as calmly as I could, and she just stared at me angry for like a full 10 seconds before she eventually said she had a date with her girls that she completely forgot about. Honestly, that answer sounded suspect to me, so I brought up the previous time that I had been depressed in the way that she had also gone out during those days, but she claimed that she had no idea what I was talking about. To be fair, it had been over 2 months at that point, so I didn't want to call her a liar in my head, though a pattern was starting to be established. Even after things started to seem fine between the two of us, it was still on my mind because I knew there was something being hidden. I just couldn't figure out what it was. It was when Daphne vanished on a third occasion. I wasn't even having a bad day, I was just really busy, that I knew something had to be up. It was so evident to me at that point. When she got back home that day, I didn't attempt to start any conversation about where she had been. I just conversed normally about mundane things, and she didn't lash out or anything like she did the other time. I was hoping she might have volunteered where she was this time around, but she didn't say anything to that effect. I think it was precisely at that point that I knew I was going to have to find out where she was going on my own. I have always been a relatively tech-savvy person, and I know my way around an Android phone pretty well. As soon as my wife went into the shower without her phone, I went straight to Google Maps to check her location history. That night she went to a bar and then to what seemed to be a residential address. I checked the previous time that she had disappeared like that, and it was pretty similar. She went to the same bar, but she ended up in a different house. I was taking pictures of all of this with my phone, especially because I planned to do more research on the addresses she was heading to. All I needed was for those addresses to truly belong to any of her girls, and I would feel so much better. I was going to check the dates for the very first time that she disappeared, but I could hear her wrapping up in the bathroom, so I stopped. Honestly, I felt like I was going to lose my mind from the uncertainty. I wasn't too sure how I was going to find the information that I needed based off those addresses only, but I knew it would be the only way that I could get any closure. I knew there were two possibilities. Either my wife was cheating on me, or she was truly going out with her girls. Quite unceremoniously going out to bars and ending up at someone's home could align with what she had told me, but it could also mean that she was going out to bars and going home with random men. She eventually came out of the bathroom. We did some small talk, which I really had to struggle through, and she went to bed. She went to sleep with her phone in her hand, and I carefully pried it out. My heart was beating furiously, trust me. She didn't wake up though, and after doing a little mental math, I checked for the first day that she disappeared suddenly. It was the same thing on all 3 days, though on 2 of those days she went to the same address after the bar. I think it was at that point that I realized what I needed to do. I half considered hiring a private investigator to tell me who lived at the addresses that I had, but I realized there was an easier way for me to do things. I just needed to set her up. The next weekend, I did my best to fake being in a mood, which was a lot harder than I assumed it'd be considering all the practice that I've gotten through my years. Exactly as I wanted, around 6 p.m., Daphne went to the room, came out dressed, and slipped out of the house thinking she was unnoticed. A few minutes later, I went out with the cartoonish disguise of a pair of shades, a jacket, and a baseball cap, and I headed straight to the same bar that I knew she was going to. I really hoped she wouldn't be able to identify me, otherwise my plan might never work again. I walked into the bar, and it didn't take me long to spot her sitting at the bar. She was alone, but she had ordered a drink already. I remember hoping that her friends would eventually join her there. I found a corner to sit in that I hoped she wouldn't notice me in, and I waited for a long time before I saw someone sit beside her. They sat there in silence for a bit before he said something to her, and I guessed from the body language that they didn't know each other. If I had come in about 10 minutes later, though, I'd likely have reached a different conclusion with the way they were laughing and the way she kept touching him. I really felt that I had seen enough at that point, but I used my self-control to wait and see how things were going to play out. There was still a stupid part of me that was hoping that her girls would show up, and the guy was just there to help kill some time. Nope. I was there until about an hour and several drinks later when they both stood up and exited the bar together. I followed them as they went on foot about 3 blocks away. Then they went up into an apartment building, and that was it. I felt like I was going to lose my mind, and as someone who already acknowledges that they have a fragile psyche, this certainly didn't help. I felt like I was going to lose my mind from across the street from the apartment building. I decided to wait though. I was going to wait until she came out. I would take a picture and I would head back home. That was my plan. It was my plan until I actually saw her come out with the guy. I took several pictures as they stood under the well-lit entrance to the building, but when they had a parting kiss right there, I had taken my last photo. I stormed across the street against what I knew was my better judgment, and to be honest, I know I was very uncomposed. You can't blame me though. I can barely remember the things that I said, but I remember that I was shouting and yelling, asking her how she could do that to me, saying that I knew she was up to no good and so on and so on. I was almost about to slug the guy beside her with a stupid, baffled look on his face before she told him to go back to his house, and he obeyed right away. When it was just me and her, we just stood there staring at each other. I know I was shaking with rage, and I was battling with a lot of very messed up thoughts in that moment. Do you know what it is like to realize that you can never really trust anyone, that anyone is capable of betraying you? I think it was when all these thoughts were pouring through my head that I asked her why. I'm tired of dealing with your depression and your moods. It's exhausting. I needed happiness. She didn't think much before she let that loose on me, and honestly, I was left broken by those words. Even now, a few days after this thing happened, those words still sting. It was exactly what I was trying to avoid when I wanted her to be sure she wanted something serious with me, because I have always known that I'll be forever burdened with depression. But she seemed to accept me for who I was and who I am. I just started walking away at that point. It took me over an hour to get back home because I was wandering the streets aimlessly. It was dangerous, but part of me wanted to get hurt. Honestly, maybe the pain could end, or something would happen to help me forget about everything. Looking back, that was a stupid thought, but I get where it was coming from. By the time I got back to the house, Daphne was there, and I guess she had enough time to realize how stupid her words were. She started to beg as soon as she saw me, but I said nothing. I went straight to our room and locked the door because seeing her was infuriating me. I wanted to tell her to get out of the house, but at the same time, I didn't want to spare a word on her. I barely slept, but the next morning I didn't see her. I was glad I didn't need to interact with her, and I didn't care where she was. I still don't know where she is or where she's been, and I don't care, but at this point, I need to make her hurt. I've been living my life with hurt because I lived through so many traumas, and to have the person I thought was my safe space add to it was one of the most painful things that I've been through. I'll be reading every single comment that's dropped here because I have nothing better to do, but I want to know how I can make her hurt the way that she's made me hurt. I think that's the only thing that will help me feel some form of closure at this point, because I have no interest in cheating back. Update. I want to thank absolutely everyone that helped me out with my previous post. Honestly, it was really hard to open up like that and expose all my weaknesses, but most of the comments were incredibly kind and supportive, and I'm very grateful for that. It's been quite a while since I made my last post, but I'm glad to say that things are much better for me, and I took a lot of the advice that you all gave to plot my next move as best as I could. The first thing that I did was call her over for us to talk. She had no idea, but I had already spoken at length with a divorce attorney, and I knew there was no fixing what we had. I admit that I might have been fool enough if she had merely cheated on me once, but after cheating on me with what I assumed were multiple people and also the horrible words she spoke to me, I knew there was no going back. I wouldn't never be able to love this woman again. As soon as she got to my house, I asked her to sit down, and she did. I asked her how many people she had cheated on me with, and she initially said just the one, but I kept pressing, telling her that I knew more than she thought I did. She insisted over and over that it was just one person until I bluffed and told her I had hired a private investigator. I mentioned one address and then another, and that's when she finally decided to let loose that she had slept with 3 people. I don't know if that was the absolute truth, but it was all I needed to hear. I handed her the divorce papers at that point, and I told her that I couldn't do life with her anymore. She started begging and pleading, which wasn't unexpected, but I think she realized that it was pointless, and she basically gave up after a bit. She walked out with the paper, and I drank the rest of the day. Eventually, we got to the whole divorce proceeding stage, and I was glad that I had a bit of evidence pointing to the fact that she was unfaithful, which helped swing things in my favor. Unsurprisingly, my mental health got dragged into the whole matter with a lot of talk about how it made it hard to live with me. Honestly, things got really dirty at that point, and it was horrible hearing my struggles weaponized like that. Of course, I think most divorces are messy like that, as far as movies have shown me. I don't want to bore you with how this side of things went, but it dragged on for a pretty long time. In the end, her lawyer was able to make it seem like her dealing with me and my mental health had been a major struggle for her, which I can admit it definitely isn't easy, but it wasn't permitted as justification for her infidelity. For the most part, things pushed in my favor. I managed to escape any alimony payments, and I relinquished our apartment because there were going to be too many bad memories for me there. I managed to get the car, though, which was certainly going to be more useful for me than the house would be. After the divorce weeks later, once I had settled into my new place, I made sure to tell every single person who knew both of us that Daphne and I were splitting up. I went into detail, not telling a single lie, but exposing her for cheating on me because of my depressive episodes. I sent the same text to friends, family, coworkers I was familiar with, and even our former landlady. I needed to make sure that everyone knew that she was a scumbag so that if they wanted to get involved with her in the future, they'd know what they were up against. She called me out an hour after and cursed me out for like 10 minutes straight, but I just let her get it all out before hanging up the phone on her. I haven't spoken to Daphne since she called me to yell every exploitive in the book, but a coworker replied to a message of mine saying that she's been having a hard time with gossip in the workplace, that maybe I'd consider recanting your statement to help her out. I left her on read. I don't think I'm going to do relationships anymore. There's too much fear in me now as to the ways a woman can hurt me, and I'm not excited to discover a new one. Maybe I'll have fun on dating apps because the body has needs, but I don't think I'm after anything serious anymore. I'm relatively old, I don't desire children, and maybe not having a woman in my life brings simplicity, which is fine by me. Anyway, I hope those of you who choose to will find women you can trust and love forever, because I know that they're out there, but I'm just not willing to take the risk and find any of them myself. Now on to the next story. Story 6. Adoptive parents kicked me out and disowned me at 17 for getting pregnant and refusing to give them my baby. 20 years later, their biological son found me on Facebook and reached out. When I was 4 years old, I lost my parents to a tragic car accident. I don't remember much about the accident except that one moment I was in the back seat and the next time I opened my eyes I was in the hospital. Being a child, it was so scary for me to wake up to nurses and doctors walking around. I remember a CPS worker sitting by my bedside explaining to me that my parents had passed away and that I would need to go stay with another family for a while. It was also confusing and overwhelming. After that, I went through a lot of changes. I stayed with different families in foster care, none of whom felt quite like home. Then, at the age of 5, I was finally introduced to Lorraine and James, who had been longing for a child of their own. From the moment I met them, I could sense their warmth and genuine care. They embraced me as their own without hesitation, filling the void in my heart that had been longing for love and belonging. I thought after all the tragedy I had suffered through, I had finally found a second family of my own. From the moment I was adopted and had to move in with them, I did notice that James was extremely strict and disciplined, and Lorraine always seemed to defer to his authority. It wasn't until much later that I learned the reason behind James's demeanor. He was an Army veteran who had been injured in action years ago. His military background explained why he insisted on everything being meticulously planned and executed down to the very last detail. Despite understanding the root of his behavior, it didn't make it any easier when he would get angry and raise his voice, especially over seemingly trivial things like being a minute late for church on Sundays. His strictness sometimes made me feel on edge, walking on eggshells to avoid his anger. Lorraine, on the other hand, was a bit more chill, and she liked to drink when James was not around. I have seen her finish the entire bottle of wine just by herself. She always seemed really sad and lost in her thoughts. She would seldom ask me about my school or about my homework. The only thing she did the whole day besides drinking was cook food and clean the house because James was quite strict about it. In the beginning, we all got along, and I didn't see a lot of fights between them. However, as time went on and I grew up, I started realizing that James was actually abusive. For James, nothing mattered to him more than my grades. He would constantly tell me how I needed to step up my game. If anyone scored more than me, he would also sometimes get angry and slap me if I got even 1 mark less in my exams and would call me stupid. He would threaten that he would drive me back to the orphanage if I didn't score good marks. As a child, I didn't know that this wasn't actually possible, so it would terrify me every time he brought it up. I would constantly work hard to please him just to ensure that he would not give me back. I would also notice that Lorraine and James would have arguments, after which James would drag her into their bedroom. She would have bruises all over her hands and face. In the beginning, I did not understand why, but then I realized that he was physically assaulting her. He didn't want me to see him beating her up in case I ever spilled the truth in front of others. Hence, he would drag Lorraine inside the bedroom. I just didn't understand why Lorraine never called the police on him. After their fight, all she ever did was sit and cry silently for hours on end while James would drink beer and watch TV. After realizing that he was abusive, I was afraid to be alone around James or do anything to piss him off. But as anyone who has grown up in an abusive family knows, abusers will find any excuse to unleash their anger on you. It didn't matter how careful I was or how much I tried to avoid upsetting him, he always found a reason to lash out. In the beginning, it was always my grades, but as I started growing up, his target shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't just about my academic performance. It became about trivial things like the clothes I wore, the friends I hung out with, and if any guy was interested in me. He would constantly tell me how I needed to come back home straight from school, as hanging out with friends would only distract me, according to him. My friends would amount to nothing, so I needed to keep my head down and study. Unbeknownst to James, Lorraine quietly allowed me to spend an hour with my friends after school. She understood that James wouldn't be home until later in the evening, so she saw it as a small opportunity for me to have some semblance of normalcy and social interaction outside of our tense home environment. It was a brief respite from the constant pressure and scrutiny that I faced at home, and I cherished those moments with my friends, even if they were fleeting. This subtle act of kindness from Lorraine meant a lot to me. However, things worsened dramatically when James lost his job. The loss of his job seemed to intensify his frustration and anger, exacerbating the abusive atmosphere in our home. With the added stress of financial instability, James became even more unpredictable and volatile, lashing out at the slightest provocation. One night, I remember Lorraine had just finished preparing dinner, and as James sat down at the table, he took one look at the meal and exploded into a tirade about how it wasn't up to his standards. He started yelling and slamming the table, telling her how she wasn't good enough, and if she could not cook properly, he would not hesitate kicking her out to the streets. He threw his plate on the wall while me and Lorraine sat terrified, just watching him. I could feel my whole body shaking. Later, when I ate the food, I didn't find anything wrong with Lorraine's cooking. As time went on, James's drinking got worse and worse. Since he was unemployed and had nothing to do but lay around the whole day, I would wake up in the morning and see beer cans everywhere in the living room, which Lorraine would have to clean up. I was also not able to hang out with any of my friends during this time since James would ask me if I was even a minute late coming back home after school. When I turned 15, one of my classmates, Harry, confessed his feelings for me and asked me out on a date. I was nervous about James finding out, but being a teenager, I wanted to experience what it was like to go on a date and explore my feelings. So, despite my apprehension, I agreed to go out with Harry. We met up at a local coffee shop after school, and we spent the afternoon chatting and getting to know each other better. Going on that date was the best decision in my life because that is how Harry and I fell in love with each other. He was everything that James was not. He was gentle and kind to everyone, including animals. He would bring me my favorite flowers whenever he could after saving up his pocket money. I did not have a good role model, so I never really expected anything from Harry. However, he treated me just right. James was always a bit suspicious and would ask me if I was hanging out with any guys. I would refuse while secretly praying that he would not find out the truth. Luckily, I was not allowed to have a phone, so there were no incriminating messages for him to read and find out. Harry and I were always careful about our dates, and we didn't even tell our friends that we were dating so that the news would not spread. Harry understood how scared I was of James, and he didn't mind keeping our relationship a secret. When prom came around, Harry and I both agreed that we would attend the dance together with our friends group to avoid any suspicions. However, when James found out that I wanted to attend prom, he refused to let me go. He told me how it was just a waste of time and refused to buy me a dress. Honestly, I did not care about a new dress since I just wanted to have a good time with my friends. I pleaded with him to let me go since I had always scored good marks just like he wanted. But he scolded me, saying these friendships were going to mean nothing and that going to the prom wasn't even a big deal. He and Lorraine had an argument over it since she didn't see any reason why I should stay at home when all my classmates would be out. This is when I remember James saying how teenagers had no sense of right and wrong and that he wasn't going to let me go just so I could fool around when I could stay at home and be safe. I pleaded and pleaded with James, trying to reason with him and explain how important this event was to me as a teenager. But no matter what I said, he remained adamant, dismissing my desires as frivolous and insignificant. He threatened that if I sneaked out to attend prom, he would lock me out. On the night of prom, I was the only one who didn't attend, and I spent the entire night crying all alone in my room. I was growing sick and tired of living with James. After high school ended, it was difficult for me to meet with Harry as I was not allowed to go out, and I didn't have a phone either. I asked James if I could have a phone, and he told me how at my age I didn't even need one. I tried to reason with him that I would be going away to college and everyone had a phone, but he told me that if I needed a phone, then I should pay for it myself. This is when I decided to get a part-time job where I could work until I had to go away for college. The pay was low, but it allowed me to earn some money and become a bit independent. I could also hang out with my boyfriend, Harry, then without James finding out since I would just make up excuses that I was at work while I was meeting him. Eventually, I received news that I had gotten into an Ivy League university with a full-ride scholarship. This was a big deal since no one from my town had gotten in, and James took it upon himself to tell everyone how proud he was of me, boasting about my achievement to anyone who would listen. He never once congratulated me properly, but he sure did brag about it in front of others as if it was his achievement. Also, following my college acceptances, I probably breathed the biggest sigh of relief in my entire life. James finally had nothing to complain about since I had fulfilled his biggest dream by getting into a good college with a scholarship. I was also working, so he could not call me lazy anymore. Also, he was so happy that he agreed to buy me a phone and asked me to save the money that I had been earning for my job to be used for any college expenses. He also allowed me to hang out with my friends after work. For the first time, I was allowed to have fun like any other person. Harry and I knew that we would be apart once we were away in college, although we did promise to meet each other whenever we could. We were intimate with each other once or twice, and every time, both of us were very careful. Jumping ahead to about 2 weeks later, I began experiencing strange symptoms similar to those of my period but without actually getting it. Now, being a smart kid, I just knew something was off with my body. I was also craving food at random hours. I panicked and told Harry that I needed to do some pregnancy tests, and he agreed. I did 3 tests and all of the tests showed positive results. I was so shocked that I collapsed on the floor crying. It felt like I was living one of the worst nightmares of my life. Harry tried to comfort me, but I was shaking uncontrollably. I knew James would kill me if he found out that I was pregnant, and that also just before I was about to go to college. Harry assured me that this was completely my decision, and he would stand by me no matter what. He told me that he would talk to his parents, and then together we could talk to James so that he doesn't get violent on me. He knew my home life, so he was quite worried for me. Harry's parents were incredibly understanding, and his mother hugged me and assured me that it happens to everyone, so I should not take so much worry. They agreed to come over to my place so we could all break the news to James. When Lorraine and James found out that I was pregnant, they were completely stunned. Lorraine asked me twice if I was actually sure, and I nodded since I had taken multiple tests. On the other hand, James exploded in a fit of anger, yelling at me that this is why he never wanted to adopt kids from strangers because there was no guarantee about their character. He called me a lot of bad words, which I won't repeat here, and told me how I had basically ruined my life. Harry's parents tried to calm him down, but James went off on them about how this was all their son's fault, and he looked like he was about to physically assault Harry, who sat in the corner quietly. This is when I started to cry and told James that I wasn't planning on keeping the pregnancy anyway, so he had nothing to worry about. I reassured him that everything could go back to normal, and I would be off to college just like we had planned. This is when Lorraine joined us, saying that she needed to talk to James privately. They excused themselves while I sat there crying and fidgeting nervously. Harry's parents looked at me sympathetically. Eventually, Lorraine and James returned, and Lorraine began speaking, her words hitting me like a tidal wave. She expressed her belief that we didn't necessarily have to give up the child, suggesting that I could carry the pregnancy to term and then relinquish my parental rights to them. I sat there in stunned silence as she emphasized that this child was a gift from God and urged us not to consider any other options. James chimed in, affirming Lorraine's sentiments and suggesting that this arrangement would be best, especially since Lorraine was already pregnant herself. His words left me utterly bewildered, and I couldn't comprehend what he was suggesting. James explained that they had discovered just a week ago that Lorraine was expecting, but that they had kept the news to themselves because they were still processing it, and now that I was pregnant too, they had decided that they could raise both children as siblings. The shock of the revelation left me speechless, grappling with the weight of their proposal and the unexpected turn of events. Harry's parents were shocked by this proposal also and immediately voiced out their disapproval, but James cut in, saying that it was not their decision to make anyway, and looked at me expectantly, waiting for an answer. I was overcome with nerves, but deep down, I knew I couldn't agree to Lorraine and James's proposal. The thought of giving up my child to be raised in an environment similar to the one I had experienced growing up with them was something I couldn't bear to entertain. While Lorraine had proven to be a caring mother in many respects, I couldn't ignore the fact that she couldn't protect herself from James's behavior, let alone guarantee the safety of my child. The idea of subjecting my unborn child to the same uncertainty and potential harm was out of the question. As much as I cherished the idea of becoming a mother one day, I knew that the timing and circumstances weren't right for me. I couldn't bring a child into the world under these conditions, knowing that I couldn't ensure their safety and well-being. I firmly told James that although I was extremely happy that I would be getting a sibling soon, I could not go through with my pregnancy as I was not mentally and physically strong enough to go through the ordeal. Also, I couldn't fathom the idea of watching my child grow up with Lorraine and James and pretend that they were simply a sibling. The thought of living a lie, denying my own child the truth of their parentage, was something I couldn't bear to face. Lorraine began to cry as she heard my decision, telling me how disappointed she was that I could not do this for her when she had sacrificed so much for me. James looked pissed and got up from his seat to pace around the room. I tried to explain to them, but they refused to understand. Harry's mother chimed in, saying she agreed with my decision and that she could make an appointment for me with the gynecologist, so we could proceed with the next course of action. This just made Lorraine cry even harder, and James began to yell if I was happy now that I was hurting her so much. He then told me that I needed to get my things and leave the house. My eyes widened in shock as James said that he was sick and tired of having me around the house when I was nothing but ungrateful and selfish for not giving them my child. Harry's parents gently told me to pack my things as quickly as possible since they could see how volatile James was becoming. I ran upstairs to quickly pack all my important documents and albums along with whatever clothes I could get my hands on. When I came downstairs, James warned me to take whatever I could because he would be throwing all my things and burning them the next day. I tried to talk to Lorraine, but she refused to even look at me. As I was walking out, James told me that I should not be coming back ever again. I just didn't understand what I did so wrong for them to disown me so mercilessly as if I meant absolutely nothing. I went back home with Harry and his parents, who graciously offered me a place to stay. The next few days were a blur as Harry's parents took me to the gynecologist, where we made an appointment for the much-needed procedure. It was a decision that weighed heavily on both me and Harry, but under the circumstances, we knew it was the best choice for our futures. After the procedure, I spent the next few days just recovering while Harry didn't leave my side for a minute. He and his parents were extremely kind and took care of me the best that they could. Throughout all this, James and Lorraine never once contacted me. When the day finally came that I was going to move into my college, I texted James about it, hoping that he would have forgiven me by now. However, he replied back, saying how much of a failure and disappointment I was and how I had turned into a prostitute. Hence, he wanted nothing to do with me. He wrote that he didn't want his bio kid to turn out like me. His words hurt so deeply that I cried for hours. They were the only parents I knew, and now they had conveniently cut me off when they were about to have their own children. My college years were tough but rewarding. I had to work part-time to pay for my expenses while also studying hard to maintain my grades. It was a struggle, but I was determined to succeed. Thankfully, Harry stuck by me through it all, just like he had promised. He would come and visit me at college whenever he could. Honestly, his unwavering support kept me going even when things got tough. During holidays, his parents would often invite me to come down to spend time with them. With them, they started to feel more like my family. I graduated from college with honors, earning the distinction of KL. Harry and his parents were there to cheer for me during my graduation ceremony. I landed a nice cushy job in my field. It was a proud moment for me, knowing I'd worked hard to get there. Eventually, Harry and I moved in together, and as time went on, our relationship only grew stronger. We supported each other through the ups and downs of life. After several years of being together, we decided to take the next step and tie the knot. Our wedding day was a beautiful celebration of our love and commitment to each other, surrounded by our closest friends and family. The thought of inviting James and Lorraine to my wedding didn't even cross my mind. As a married couple, Harry and I have continued to build our life together for years. Recently, we took the big leap and bought another house for ourselves while we rented out our previous home. We've turned this new place into our cozy sanctuary where we can create new memories and plan for the future. The reason we bought this second place was to be closer to Harry's parents as they are getting old. They have become sort of my parents too, so I want to take care of them in any way that I can. It's been almost 20 years now since I was kicked out by James and Lorraine, and I don't even remember them much anymore. Throughout all these years, I have not really bothered to think about them, although I do remember that I spent my first year of college crying and missing them a lot. But by the second year, I knew that this was my chance to build a new life for myself, one free from their rejection. Hence, I made myself stop thinking about them altogether. It did hurt a lot, and it took a lot of strength for me to build this life all on my own. They have never bothered calling me in all these years, and honestly, I have never bothered checking in with them also. Throughout this time, Harry has been my rock, my partner in every sense of the word. We never had any children, but we do have 2 dogs that we absolutely love. We visit Harry's parents every other weekend. We regularly go on trips and enjoy exploring new restaurants together. Overall, I can say that my life has turned out well, and I wish I could hug my 17-year-old self now for worrying so much about her future. Recently, I got a friend request on Facebook from an unknown person called Matt, who had a very familiar surname. When I opened his profile, I almost jolted in surprise when I realized that he looked eerily similar to James. I accepted his request and he sent me a message saying hello, so I replied back. He then told me that this might be a weird question, but he wanted to know if I knew someone named James and Lorraine. I almost caught my breath as now I was sure that it was indeed him. He was their son. I was a bit nervous to reply, but I also wanted to be truthful, so I told him that I indeed knew them since they had adopted me when I was 5 years old. Matt then excitedly replied back that he wanted to talk to me if I was comfortable, so I agreed. I gave him my number, and he gave me a call. It was so awkward at first because I did not know what to say, but Matt started off excitedly about how he always knew that his parents had a child before him since he had seen my pictures in the family photo album, but whenever he would ask them about it, they would refuse to give him an explanation. He told me that he had been searching for me for a very long time as he had found out my name from the people back in our hometown, and his luck would have it, he had accidentally stumbled onto my profile recently. He said that he had no reason to contact me except just to know the truth. Matt's earnest request for the truth left me feeling conflicted. But ultimately, I knew I had to be honest with him. With a heavy heart, I began to recount the painful events of my past, including how his parents had asked me to give up my child for them and subsequently kicked me out when I didn't comply. I held nothing back as I revealed how they had been absent from my life for all these years, and the only reason I had managed to survive was because of the kindness and support of my husband's parents. It was a difficult conversation filled with raw emotion and painful memories, which I had long since kept hidden inside me. As I spoke, I could sense the shock and disbelief in Matt's voice, but he listened attentively, absorbing every word. When I finished, there was a heavy silence from his side. After taking a moment to comprehend what I had just said, Matt told me how he had no idea that his parents had treated me so unbelievably cruelly, and that he had always assumed that I had run away of my own will, as that is what they had apparently told everyone back in our hometown. He told me that he never imagined his parents could do such a thing and thanked me for my honesty with a tone of sincerity. He apologized to me on behalf of his parents, expressing regret for the pain they had caused me. After our conversation, I've been feeling grateful that Matt made the effort over the years to reach out to me. His understanding and support have brought me a sense of comfort and validation. However, I can't shake the worry about how James and Lorraine will react once they find out that I've shared the truth with Matt. I don't know if I did right for telling them the truth, or should I not have interfered and kept my mouth shut. Update 1. I just wanted to update you that I was in fact right to worry, because in just a matter of 24 hours, I've received multiple calls and texts from Lorraine and James. I have never really changed my number in all these years, so I guess it was easy for them to find me. They have sent me multiple messages calling me various names, but mostly their anger stems from why I shared our family secrets with Matt and accused me of betraying their trust. James wrote in a message that I should have just kept my mouth shut as I had for all these years and not tried to come in between him and his son. Feeling overwhelmed and unsure of how to respond, I've been avoiding their calls and messages, unsure of how to navigate this unexpected confrontation. Update 2. I told my husband about all this. He had no idea about Matt reaching out to me. However, when he found out that I had spilled the beans, he thought that I should not have done that. He clarified that it was not because telling the truth was wrong, but because he thought James was clearly unhinged, and now this would just add unnecessary drama into our lives. I did talk to Matt about everything. He informed me that after our conversation, he confronted James and Lorraine, who tried to deny everything. They told him that I was nothing but a liar and a selfish person who used them until I could get away to college. However, Matt didn't believe them and asked them to stay away from his kids. He also informed them that he would be cutting them off and would no longer be helping them out financially. Matt then went on to tell me how he and his wife had recently adopted twins, but James and Lorraine were not exactly thrilled about it and had refused to even come and visit his children. It had made him question their behavior, but they had brushed his concerns off. However, after reaching out to me and finding out the real story of my past, he realized exactly why they were not so happy with him adopting his kids. He told me that he had no idea that James and Lorraine would lash out at me and assured me that he would ask them to back off. He even invited me to visit his twins whenever I could find time, telling me that regardless of how his parents treated me, he would always love to get to know me better since I was his sibling anyway. After my conversation with Matt, I do feel much better. Honestly, I am really surprised by how sweet he is and how different he is compared to James and Lorraine. I might actually take up his invitation and visit his children one of these days with my husband. Update 3. So it's been 7 months since my last update, and since some of you have been asking for an update, here it goes. I took the step to block James and Lorraine from all communication channels, so I haven't received any threatening messages from them. Additionally, Matt did intervene and spoke to them, so I'm sure they had no choice but to back off. In the past few months, me and Harry have visited Matt and his wife at least 4 times, and they have been incredibly welcoming each time. We've spent hours catching up, sharing stories, and bonding over our childhood experiences. During these visits, I've had the opportunity to spend time with Matt's twins as well, who are absolute bundles of joy. I'm genuinely grateful now that Matt reached out to me, and I am happy for the newfound connection with him and his family as it has helped me heal from the wounds of the past. Now on to the next story. Story 7. Discovered my wife had been cheating on me with her high school crush throughout our entire marriage, so I exposed their affair to everyone at her reunion and kicked her out. I was married to my ex-wife for almost 4 years, but unfortunately, we had to go our separate ways because she did the unthinkable. My ex-wife and I met at a business seminar in town. We were there to listen to a renowned business guest speaker, and coincidentally, we sat beside each other throughout the seminar. We occasionally talked about a couple of things which mostly had to do with the things we learned, and after the seminar was over, we exchanged contacts. We started talking, and about a week later, we decided to go out for lunch. As we had lunch that day, I was puzzled at how intelligent she was and her passion for business, and after our first date, we saw each other more often. Eventually, we ended up dating because I fell in love with her, and 8 months later, we married. We were married for almost 4 years before I found out she had been making a fool out of me. I'd love to add that while my ex-wife and I were married, there was nothing she wanted that I didn't give her. I was still a businessman and earned decent money. My ex-wife didn't own a business like mine. She worked for a business consulting firm and was earning well too. We had no kids because she said she wasn't ready, and I was okay with that. All through the 3 years of our marriage, I did my best as a good husband and even helped at home. I wanted more than anything for us to be happily married for as long as possible. I offered to help in the kitchen, took her on surprise vacations, and did pretty much what a man would do to make the woman he loved happy. Even on my hectic and tired days, I made sure I went home early, never canceled on her. And most times I had to reschedule many things because I believed family was one of the most important aspects of life. Unlike other couples, my ex-wife and I barely fought. She was more of an extrovert, a very social butterfly, and the life of the party, while I was reserved to a level, so whenever we had a reason to argue, she was always at fault, and each time we were so close to fighting or arguing, I would always apologize because I wanted us to be at peace at all times. I know you all might think I did that as a weak man, but that's not why. I grew up in a very toxic environment. My parents were always fighting, and I did not want to replicate the same thing in my marriage. On our 3rd anniversary, we did a renewal of wedding vows, and almost 7 months after, I stumbled upon something that altered the rest of our marriage. That Saturday, I was cleaning the house, and I had every intention of cleaning our closet. My ex-wife and I shared a closet. She had been the only one cleaning it in the past, so I decided to take things out of the closet that day and thoroughly clean up. I started by taking things out of the closet, and once I was done cleaning and dusting, I tried to arrange and organize them again. While organizing, I mistakenly kicked open one of my wife's shoe boxes as I tried to move around, and many letters and pictures were scattered on the ground. At first, I was worried I kicked out one of her expensive shoes because she left the very expensive ones in a box. But after I saw the letters, I was relieved. Initially, I thought the letters were old letters from an old teenage lover, or maybe there were letters she had never sent, and I was curious to find out how foolish in love she was at that time. But as I looked at them closely, I noticed recently added letters which piqued my curiosity. As soon as I got down to the 4th line of one of the recently added letters, I felt my lower stomach churn, and my heartbeat increased, and as I got to the end, my world shattered. I was right. There were letters from an old lover, and it was her high school crush. The letter I read detailed one of their recent escapades. There were even photos of them lying under the sheets together. It wasn't just one letter. There were more of them, and one of them even talked about the night before our wedding and how they enjoyed each other in bed. I wanted to be sure of what I read, so I went through all the letters and realized their relationship had been going on even while we were dating. Needless to ask if I was heartbroken because I was beyond heartbroken. I was devastated and hurt, and in my 37 years on Earth, it was the 2nd time a woman had hurt me so much. The worst part was that I never saw it coming and would never believe my wife would cheat. I don't know how she did it because nothing was alarming about her. She still cared for me in the house and satisfied my bed needs, and I never suspected her or noticed anything fishy. I have watched a few videos on this channel where men say their wives changed suddenly or dressed differently, but with my ex-wife there was no sign. Everything remained the same, and our love for each other grew over the years too. That same afternoon, she returned home and acted like everything was cool, but how I saw her changed. I tried to hide it, but it was not as easy as I imagined. It hurt so much that I loved her blindly, but she took my love for granted and cheated on me. The good thing was she was hosting her high school reunion, which was only a few days away. I had already scanned the letters and photos and intended to send them straight to her parents, but I got an idea from one of the stories I listened to here. As a part of their high school reunion, she created a slideshow of all her memories in high school, and I saw that as a perfect way to carry out my revenge. A night before her dear reunion, I secretly planted the letter and photos I scanned in her slideshow almost at the beginning, and I waited for her to humiliate herself publicly on D-Day. Everyone gathered as planned, both from near and far, and they were all having a good time at the venue. I saw her crush, and she exchanged a couple of smiles with him. Honestly, I almost lost it, but I didn't want to ruin my perfect plan. Eventually, the time for her slideshow came, and just as she was smiling at the screen and expecting to see another of her teenage hot girl pictures, the picture of her and her high school crush under the sheet popped up, and her mouth dropped. She was so shocked, but it wasn't just her. Her friends and classmates were shocked too, and just as she was trying to wrap her head around what was happening, the last slideshow came with an instruction from me, which read, "Don't come home tonight. We are getting divorced immediately." She read that. She turned in my direction and ran towards me, but I walked out of the venue. Before I left, I could see the disappointment on the faces of her friends and classmates, and it appeased me. That night, she did not come home as I had instructed, but she kept blowing my phone with calls, text messages, and voicemails. One of her voicemails said she could explain, and it wasn't what I thought. The next day, I received a package I ordered. They were pillows and huge gift bags with a picture of her and her affair partner printed on them, and I sent them along with her stuff to her parents' house. I also dropped the letters and original pictures on their WhatsApp family group chat and exited the group. As expected, her parents tried to call, but I blocked their and my ex-wife's numbers too. When the divorce papers were ready, my lawyer reached out to her, and she signed them after delaying for a while. Although it's so painful, I'm glad we are not together anymore. Now I get why most people kick against the idea of getting married, and I think I might fall in love one day, but I'm done with getting married and repeating the cycle with unfaithful women. Now on to the next story. Story 8. Pregnant wife used gym as a cover for her affair. Now she's moved in with her lover and wants to play happy family with my baby. My wife is 30 years old, and she's always worked out and been in shape, but lately I feel like it's becoming excessive. She used to regularly work out at a gym when she was in college. At some point she stopped going to the gym, I think lately just due to her schedule, and preferred to work out at home or go for runs outside. About 18 months ago, she announced she was going to get back into the habit of going to the gym. She now had a job where she's able to make more time for it. Started off normal, but slowly became more and more frequent. She signed up for classes on the weekend both days. She started going to the gym every day, then it became the morning before work, and then again later in the evening every single day. If she's stressed, she goes to the gym. Experience some sort of life crisis, she immediately heads to the gym. We have an argument, runs to the gym. She's 4 months pregnant right now. I'm kind of surprised we even had time to make a kid. I understand that it's safe for her to work out, especially since she was already in the habit of doing it before she got pregnant, but the intensity is not slowing down. If she misses one of her normal gym sessions, she becomes so irritable, like a junkie not getting her fix. It's just bizarre, truly a case of too much of a good thing. Of course, she gets upset when I voice that I feel it's becoming an unhealthy obsession, and that I miss spending time with her because she's there so much. She has all of these friends and this whole circle of people there that she seems to prefer spending time with over me. Why don't we work out together at the gym? The gym is her time, she says. This isn't a case of me feeling insecure because she's in great physical shape and I'm a fat slob. I work out and I'm in shape. My job really requires me to stay in shape, so I can't let myself go if I want to. I genuinely feel her gym habits are unhealthy. She's overexercising for one. There is such a thing, but worse than that, I feel it's becoming a way for her to escape everything else in her life. She never actually fixed anything that goes wrong in her life. She just runs off to the gym to get some sort of mood boost, and then that's it. She also never gets anything else done in a practical sense because how can she when she's at the gym so often? It's to the point where I have to do every chore, and if food is getting made, I'm going to have to do it. I don't expect her to do all of those things, but it should at least be a shared effort. People we know have even commented about it to me. They've said things about how she seems different, how she sure is at the gym a lot, and many of her friends and family barely see her anymore. Some have even suggested she's having an affair with somebody there. Please tell me that this doesn't sound normal to you. She insists this is perfectly normal. Update 1. I posted not very long ago about my wife's addiction to the gym, a compulsion if you will. She spends most of her free time there. She often goes twice a day and sometimes even 3 times. If we have a fight at night and she needs to run off instead of actually talking to me, She won't let me go to her gym, and she refuses to go to mine. Her gym is her place, my gym is my place, and that's just the way it has to be according to her. I'd love to have her come along with me. I've invited her multiple times. She's about 18 weeks pregnant right now. This is our first baby. She worked out like crazy prior to the pregnancy, and she continues to just as hard now. I truly didn't think she was cheating on me. People suggested it in the last thread, and I laughed. You can tell she's at the gym a lot. She's in great shape, so she's obviously going there. I felt really confident about the cheating issue, and when I posted 9 days ago, I wasn't even considering cheating. I'm embarrassed to admit that after reading a lot of the comments on my last post, I thought maybe I was being overly confident about her fidelity. She usually always has her phone on her, but she left it in the kitchen counter, and as stupid as I felt, I decided to do a quick swipe through her texts. She had a current text conversation going on with a guy. I recognized the same name of a guy from the gym she mentions a lot. She's friends with a lot of people there, went to one of their weddings last fall. I wasn't too terribly concerned until I started reading the texts. Never wanted to know what the guy's dick looked like. But I know now. She was only out of the room for literally about a minute or two, so I had to scroll fast. I was furious. I asked her what that conversation was about. She started yelling at me for looking at her phone. I told her she's acting so weird and the gym obsession was really bothering me. So I just decided to look and was ashamed that I did, but I thought I'd find nothing. All she said, it's nothing, didn't look like nothing to me. She sure seemed pretty interested in this nothing. I wanted to know if she's been with him for how long. She kept saying no. I left the house because I was so furious, but not before I slammed her phone on the ground and shattered it. She was calling me all sorts of names for breaking her phone. She hit me on the back as hard as she could. I left, went to my brother's house. My brother and sister-in-law were shocked, although my sister-in-law was one of the most vocal ones about my wife's gym obsession being weird and bringing it up to me constantly. I went home. She was in bed crying. She obviously couldn't call me or anyone else for that matter. She was laying it on thick. I don't know if you'd ever come home. Give me a break. I took her phone to get repaired tonight. She doesn't deserve it, but I still feel like an ass breaking her phone. I still don't know how deep it goes. She won't admit to anything beyond what I saw. Was it sexting bad enough or more? I'm convinced it was a lot more, but she refuses to hand over her phone and is now trying to act like I'm this terrible monster who is abusing her because I broke her phone. Not my proudest moment, but I honestly wanted to body slam her after she punched me. I have never and would never actually touch her like that. Update 2. My wife admitted to an affair February 12, 2024. Not sure if posting something in my profile will be seen by anyone, but I don't feel like making another update in a subreddit today. My wife asked me to stay home from work so we could talk. She laid in bed all day yesterday trying to get me to feel sorry for her, but I paid absolutely no attention to her and ended up leaving the house to go to my family's Super Bowl party. I wasn't in the mood to go, but I wasn't going to sit at home with her. It really bothered her that I left. She kept texting me things like, "Who just leaves like that when something like this is happening? Who is that cold and callous that they just leave to go to a party?" I stayed home today to talk to her. She was full of tears. She's so sorry according to her. She really was going to the gym twice a day because she likes going there. That's where her friends are. Makes her feel good. It's fun for her. She met this guy there and he started flirting with her. Everyone likes him. He's one of the most popular guys there. I didn't realize there were popular people at gyms. She admitted that she flirted back but didn't mean anything by it. She didn't reciprocate very much at first, but he gave her butterflies, and she just found herself flirting back without thinking. She said it felt like when she had a crush on somebody when she was in school when she was younger. They started texting. At first it was just friendly and nothing sexual for several months, but she'd feel giddy every time she got a message from him. She was really attracted to him, but told him that she was married and there could never actually be anything between them. According to her, he kept flirting with her anyway and said, "Sure, we won't cross the line," until they did cross the line. She said she had tried to resist it for a while, but then one day they kissed. She admitted to enjoying it but also feeling that it was wrong. She must not have felt that bad because she slept with him for the first time later that night. She described it like falling in love with somebody for the first time. All she could think about was him. Is she in love with him? She doesn't know. Is this baby mine? She thinks so, but there's always a small chance it could be his. He always uses a condom, so she doesn't think it's his baby, but they were sleeping together at the time she got pregnant. She loves me. She can't help that there's just this huge spark between the two of them. She doesn't know if she loves him. She doesn't know if the baby is mine. She doesn't know why she did this. She doesn't know what she thinks we should do. The nail in the coffin is when she said, "You would really leave me if it's not your baby? Would you?" She had the balls to ask me that. I told her, of course I'm leaving her, and I wouldn't raise another man's child. She seemed shocked. She said, "Really? With everything we have, in all our history, you wouldn't even consider it? She can't be serious." I told her no, I would never consider it. She agreed to get a DNA test. She tearfully agreed like I'm supposed to feel sorry for her about it. I don't know who this woman is. She was crying the whole time, but not tears of an ashamed or sorry person. They were tears for herself and meant to try to make me feel bad. Feel bad for what? That her heart is apparently so torn? Comments where Op has replied, "Opie, she's ruined my life, but I just feel numb right now. I barely feel anything at the moment. It would have been bad enough for her to have an affair and cheat on me, but she couldn't have stopped when she found out she was pregnant. At least I could have walked away if it wasn't for this pregnancy. Maybe I still can, but I won't know for sure until I get some test results. She's almost positive the baby is mine. I'm stuck dealing with her forever then. My child will grow up with divorced parents. Their mom will be the gym bike. Maybe she'll even take off to live near her family and take my kid with her. Oh, but then she couldn't be near the guy who gives her butterflies and her in gym changing rooms. The thrill, the excitement. How can I even blame her? She's ruined fatherhood for me. Whether this is my kid or not, if by some chance this isn't my baby and I'm able to completely break free, how will I not think of this one day when I start a family? I was so happy to have this baby with her. I was really excited, even though we hadn't planned for it. Right now we have names picked out. I've been there for everything and now she does this to me. Not only me, but this poor kid regardless of who their father is. OP, she's saying, I'll never go back to the gym again. I'll never talk to him again, but she can't say whether she's in love with him or not. What kind of idiot does she think I am? TTI survivors, she still thinks there is hope to save your relationship. Jesus Christ. OP, yeah, I believe she still thinks there's a chance I'll agree to raise another man's child with her. She doesn't take me seriously when I say there's no way I do that. She is dependent on me. She probably wouldn't leave me if I knocked somebody else up and wanted her to play mommy. I know that sounds terrible and it's nothing I'd ever do, but I feel like she'd be mad and she'd go screw somebody else to get back at me. But she probably would be too scared to actually leave me. I don't feel the same way about leaving her. I'm sad to leave her. I don't want this to be our reality. I can't even say that I completely hate her yet, but I won't raise another man's child. If she feels so strongly about that guy and he's so wonderful, go get together with him then and leave everyone else alone. Hilda, she was practically on her knees yesterday saying, I won't go back to the gym. I won't ever contact him again. I feel like that doesn't really mesh with the fact that she doesn't even know if she's in love with him or not. She obviously still has very strong feelings for him, which are probably coming more from between her legs than her actual heart, but doesn't really matter either way to me. I think despite anything to do with him, she's dependent on me in a way for stability. Maybe just out of comfort. Maybe we've been together since she was 20 years old, so I'm just this familiar person. I guess she has her gym friends out here, but other than that she has no family or friends out here. She makes pretty good money, but I make more and all of our benefits are through me. Even with her good salary, it would be difficult to survive on her own as a single mom here with all of the daily living expenses or at least live anywhere near the level she wants to live at. Hilda. Today is the day she was crying all night about how she's ruined her life. She seemed genuine, like reality is hitting her, but I didn't pay any attention to her at all. I just pretended she wasn't there. I did ask her if she'll get blood drawn for a paternity test. I asked her please not hurt me further by keeping me in limbo about that for months. She said she doesn't want to. OP on if he got a lawyer and if he ever met the AP. I'm meeting with a lawyer next week, and we'll see what they advise. How can she parade me around when I've never been allowed to go to her gym? I've met two of the people, a slightly older married couple. Yes, I met the AP last summer. He called her because he was drunk at a bar and couldn't drive home, so he called her to come get him. I didn't think it was a good idea for her to go pick somebody up late at night, so I went with her. I want out of the house, but I don't necessarily want her to fly back home to where she's from just yet. If this is my kid and she gives birth out here, I'll be in a much better position. If she leaves and goes home to her parents, she could very well be allowed to stay there, and that would be considered the baby's place of residence. She missed a few days of work, but she has gone to work since all of this happened. She was having a meltdown this morning and I left for work. She told me had to go in late today, and when she got there everybody was making her food and tea and stuff. She obviously didn't tell them what really happened, how long the affair was happening. She claims they've been sleeping together since the summer. That's just what she claims, of course. My wife is moving in with her AP. They're in love. Update 3. My life has been reduced to a trashy daytime talk show. The woman who was once my wife, who I considered a classy woman, has turned into complete trailer trash. Today she announced that she's moving in with her affair partner from the gym. She's pregnant, might be his kid, might be mine. She's too embarrassed to go get blood drawn for a paternity test. She spent about a week trying to get my attention, to get me to talk to her, to get me to beg her to be mine. I didn't fall for any of it. I've largely been ignoring her, and when we have to speak, I keep it very brief. We've been living together this whole time, but I'm in a different room now and functioning separate from her in all ways. So her pouting and trying to get me to pay attention to her and give her a gold star for not going to the gym for 5 days in a row didn't work. Today she texted me to say she is moving in with him. Somehow I still care about this person. I've already met with a lawyer though. I can care about her as a human being and possible mother of my child without being married to her. Still, it stung to hear her say she was going to be with him. I told her it wasn't a smart move to leave the house. I've even told her she should probably meet with a lawyer. She doesn't care about anything I have to say. I don't think she needs to move in with anybody. I actually feel bad for her that she can't just be on her own. I asked her if he actually knew she was pregnant and wanted to know what story she's been telling him this whole time. She said he knows, and he doesn't care if it's my baby. He loves her and wants to be with her. Bizarre. You can't find anyone else? Somebody who isn't a married pregnant woman? Why would you take that on? Doesn't make sense to me. He's scum, but he's good-look scum who apparently is gainfully employed and owns his own home. So you can't tell me that my married pregnant wife is your only option here. I just can't imagine being a single guy like that and wanting to put up with this baggage when I could have other options. And if this really is my baby, then what? They'll live with my wife in this weasel 50% of the time. I don't know how my life turned into this mess, and she thinks it's embarrassing to have to go get blood drawn. My wife has agreed to a paternity test February 29, 2024. My wife moved in with her AP last weekend. She didn't take very much at all. Most of her stuff is still in the house. I still get the feeling she was just waiting for me to beg her to come home, but I didn't reach out to her at all after she left. It was a strange mixture of relief, anger, and sadness. I don't think I ate at all until last night. Just never felt hungry. Drank a little too much, but I'm fine. I'm posting this update because I've received a ton of messages from people, and honestly it's emotionally draining to respond to each one and to have to type the same stuff out. I just don't feel like talking about her that much. So this morning she texted me to say her AP wants to get a DNA test done, so she's going to do it. Look at that, didn't matter when I wanted one, but now that he has requested it, she suddenly thinks it's a great idea. She asked if I wanted to submit a sample because it'll be cheaper to have 2 dads tested as part of one package. I don't even care about the cost at this point. I just want an answer. I don't have to see or interact with them at all. I just have to make my own appointment with the lab to get my cheek swabbed. So this Saturday I'm going to do that, and we should have the results within a week. I'll take what I can get at this point because it's better than her dragging this out for another 20 weeks. So that's it, I'm fine, I'm going to work every day trying to function. Just feel stuck in limbo. I miss her honestly. I hate that she's there with him. It makes me sick. Part of me does want to beg her to come home. It'll be even worse if I find out that it's my baby and she's there with him, unless he drops her at that news. I won't let myself. I won't play any of those games with her. Comments where Op has replied, TTI survivors, have you gotten the paternity test results? OP, at 11 o'clock this morning, I got the news that I'm the father. I feel incredibly conflicted right now. Jacobibriant 8, is she asking to come back home, or is she still planning on staying with the other guy? Regardless, this is a rough situation. I'm sorry for you, bro. OOP. We haven't talked. Terebriant 8, understandable, but I think that you should try and set up a meeting with her somewhere public to discuss the pregnancy and the future in general with her. Whether or not your marriage is going to end, the kid is still going to be a big part of your life, so it would be best to see where both of you stand in that regard. Also, I recall you saying earlier that you think that your wife would listen to what her affair partner would say to her or something similar to that, so now that it's not his kid, I would be concerned about him pressuring her into getting an abortion. So I think you really should talk to your wife about your unborn child and whatnot. OP, we definitely need to talk. But I got the news in the middle of a workday, so I wasn't in the mood to have a full-blown conversation with her. I think I need to sort of wrap my head around the reality of it all before I say too much to her anyway. An update on my wife's affair and pregnancy, March 15, 2024. My wife has been having an affair with a guy she met at the gym for at least nearly a year. She's around 22 weeks pregnant right now. She was somewhere around 17 weeks when I discovered she was cheating. She maintained that she was positive I was the father, but then refused to get a paternity test done to ease my mind. We recently had a paternity test done at the request of her affair partner, and it proves the baby is mine. It's been very mixed emotions for me, very up and down. Originally, I thought I just wanted to be completely done with her and not have any lifelong ties in the form of a full-blown human being we shared, but I was sort of happy or relieved when I got the results. I'd already had it in my mind that I was going to be a father for months before I found out she was cheating. Sometimes I just have moments where I can't believe this is my life, that this is the situation that my kid will be born into, and I hate her for it. She's still living with him. All of her belongings are still here in our house. I refuse to do the work of packing everything up for her. She doesn't seem concerned about taking any of her things beyond the essentials. After we got the news that I'm the baby's father, she texted me to say she's glad I'm the father and that she knows I'll be a great dad. She was texting me new baby name ideas last night. She's tried calling, but I ignore the calls. I only speak with her via text. This morning she asked if she could come by and get a few things. I told her it was fine, as I've been advised by my lawyer to not prevent her entry from the home, but I told her that he better not be with her. So who shows up with her? The scumbag boyfriend. He walks right on into the house behind her like it's no big deal. She ran upstairs to get the stuff she wanted, and he and I were just left standing there in the living room. He told me it wasn't her fault that he was there. She told him I didn't want come, but he forced his way along. He wanted to talk to me, supposedly to tell me he understands how I must be feeling. No, you don't know. He told me he knows I probably don't believe him, but he genuinely loves her and knew he probably wasn't the father. He accepts it and then tried to assure me he won't try to take my place with the baby and hopes we can just get along since we're both going to be in her life now. He promises that she's fine, he's looking after her. I told him that I couldn't for the life of me imagine what he wanted with a pregnant woman who is having another man's child. That I found it weird. Then I told him if he didn't get out of my house, I'd punch him. I went upstairs, and she was trying to find some things in the bathroom. I got mad, asked her why she brought him along, and told her I find it really strange that he still wants to be with her now that he knows he has nothing to do with this baby, and that I refuse to let him have anything to do with my child. She said he talked her into coming, and she's sorry and never meant for any of this to happen. But she's in love with him now. He is supposedly what 30-year-old her is looking for, not me. She's setting up a nursery in his house, and I can set one up at my house, and she has no intention of trying to get full custody or anything like that. She doesn't want to keep me from being involved in my child's life. How generous of her. She went back downstairs, and I followed her, and he was still standing there in the living room, and I just walked up to him and punched him. He stumbled back and fell into a table. She yelled, "What the hell?" and ran over to him. I don't even care at this point. as if he's gonna call the cops. He deserved it, and it wouldn't have happened had he just left like I told him to. Several hours later, she texted me to say she was sorry about today. He really meant what he said, and he's actually a good guy, and he cares about her, and he respects me. WTF, he respects me? He was screwing my wife in the gym locker room. I was like, you can't be serious? She said, fine, I'm trying to have a mature conversation about this. I can't help that we fell in love. Believe it or not, I'm not trying to hurt you, and I want everything to be amicable. This guy stole my wife and he's stealing my kid too. Sure, I'm the actual father, but now they're setting up a nursery together in his house. I've tried to not feel jealous or sad. I've tried to maintain the thought that he's the trash man who picked up my garbage. Sometimes I feel that way, but the truth is that I loved her and still love her. I don't want to stay married to her on principle alone, but this is devastating to me. Now on to the next story. Story 9. Wife kissed my twin at our party, and I caught them having sex in his garage, and it turns out that she always wanted to sleep with both of us. Now we're divorced, and I lost my best friend. My wife and I met in high school, and we've been together ever since our junior year. We both met in art class, and we fell in love over our shared interest in painting. It was both of our dreams to go to art school and eventually be able to sell our work for a living. After high school and college, we did our best to follow that dream. However, being a successful painter is a very competitive career, so we weren't able to succeed on that front. We both got other jobs, and we ended up finding happiness in different fields. One thing about me is that I am a twin. I have an identical twin brother, and it's nearly impossible to tell us apart. It's been a funny joke our entire lives, and we have both gotten used to being mistaken by the people around us. There have even been points in our lives where our partners would come up to the wrong person to say something. Then we would have to correct them. My wife would always joke about how she almost kissed my brother or how she was worried she might climb into bed with the wrong twin. Everyone just laughed it off because it was an insane idea. My twin would never let that happen. At least that's what I thought. My brother was my best friend in the world. We were the exact stereotype of twins that you can imagine we were. I was the good twin and he was the evil twin. He was the one who was always getting into trouble, while I was there to cover up for his mistakes. He got married about a year after I did. This is not something that I'm proud of by any means, but because he was my brother, and I wanted the best for him, I ended up covering for him after he cheated on his fiancée. It was during his bachelor party. He was completely trash, and he ended up hooking up with some other random woman in the bathroom at a nightclub. He told me about it after, like it was the funniest thing in the world. He didn't even remember it the next morning. I talked to him about it, and he begged me not to tell anyone. I agreed to keep the secret, rationalizing it as just a drunken mistake that didn't need to potentially ruin his marriage. All these years later, I can't help but still think about it. It was very easy for him to slip up at the time, so I can't help but wonder if it was the only time. Ever since my brother and I moved away from each other, we've started a tradition of having a 4th of July celebration together. We would always alternate between whose house we would go to, and we would go all out for the holiday weekend. It was always nice for us just to be able to get together and catch up too. Everything seemed normal at the beginning of the weekend. We all caught up, cooked on the grill, and set off a bunch of fireworks. All of the adults had some drinks, and it was a fun time. Toward the end of the night, I saw my wife walking up behind my brother to hug him and kiss him. When I saw them, she had just started kissing the back of his neck. Immediately I yelled at her and said she had the wrong twin. They pulled away from each other quickly and laughed it off. My sister-in-law and I were also laughing. My wife and brother both said that they thought it was their partner. It was a little uncomfortable, but I believed her. Later that night, after we had all gone to bed, I heard my wife get up and walk out of the room. I assumed she was going to the bathroom or getting some water. It wasn't anything unusual, but she didn't come back for quite some time. After about 10 minutes, I was curious, so I got up to go look for her. I didn't see her anywhere in the house. I went back upstairs to call her, and that's when I noticed her phone was still on the nightstand. While the screen was lit up, I saw that there were a couple of unread messages from my brother. I picked up the phone and looked at them to realize they were sent just moments before she walked out of the room. I unlocked her phone to look through them, and I saw a message that read, "Are you serious about what you said earlier, because I really do think you're sexy?" My wife replied saying that she was serious, and he told her to meet her in the garage. My brother had a detached garage in his backyard, which explained why I didn't see her anymore in the house. Their messages were quite alarming. It was only that brief conversation in the messages, but it definitely seemed like they were about to do something in the garage. I went to the garage as quickly as I could to try to catch them and whatever it was they were doing. As I stepped outside, I noticed that the lights inside the garage were on. When I peeped through the windows, I didn't see either of them at first, though I did notice one of the cars rocking back and forth. My gut told me that they were in the car sleeping together. I opened the side door, and I looked inside to see that I was right. I had the foresight to take one picture of them before I opened the door and dragged my brother off of my wife. They were both shocked to see me, but they quickly covered themselves up and tried to apologize. We got into a full-blown screaming match. I was yelling at my brother and threatening to hurt him. My wife was trying to calm me down, but I was yelling at her too. Everyone inside the house heard it, so my sister-in-law came running out to see what was going on. When I explained everything, she joined in on the argument too. One of the neighbors actually ended up calling the police because we were fighting. Nobody was charged with anything. The officer that came out just did his best to separate us and calm us down. I ended up driving off alone that night to try and cool down without having to be around my wife or brother. When I got back the next day, my brother and wife had been kicked out of the house. I spoke to my sister-in-law, and she told me that she couldn't be around either of them, so she made them leave. I had countless missed calls for my wife, but I ignored all of them. I talked to my sister-in-law before anyone else to see how she was feeling. Apparently, when she asked my wife why she would do that, she told her that it had always been something she wanted to do. Toward the end of our conversation, I told her about what happened at my brother's bachelor party. She was hurt that I didn't mention anything before, but I think that put the nail in the coffin for her. It just didn't make sense to either of us because my brother and I are identical twins. There was nothing about my brother that I didn't also have appearance-wise. A few days passed, and I was back home and ready to have a conversation with my wife. I planned on telling her that we were going to be getting divorced and she had no say in the matter. When I asked her for clarity, she told me that it had always been something she wanted to do because we were twins. She wanted to sleep with both of us. She had been curious about how similar we were in different ways. The more she tried to explain herself, the more irritated I was with her. It really just seemed like she had some kind of fetish about it. I reached out to my sister-in-law and asked her about how things were going with her and my brother, to which she told me that she was divorcing him. Both of us went through with our divorces, leaving my brother and wife kind of screwed in the end. My wife was forced to get a second job to cover some of the bills that she would have to take care of on her own. We were only renting, so we didn't have to go through the ordeal of splitting a lot of our assets. We have joint custody of our children now, and we're working to find some common ground between us to give the kids a semi-normal life. I don't talk to my brother anymore. Honestly, that hurts more than anything in this. Everybody else in my family is kind of frustrated with him for causing such a rift as well. We have reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.